wife Kelly, I pondered the state of our marriage. Was it transforming into a basket of spoiled lemons, or was it just my imagination? Exiting the car, I retrieved the mail from our box, more bills, ads, and mostly addressed to occupant. I felt exhausted, a regular occurrence from working 16 hours a day, 4 days a week, not to mention the 1 day off from the nearby fast food place. The reason for my hectic schedule was simple: we had bills to pay, and we aimed to save for a future house. Additionally, I wanted to plan something special for Kelly on our approaching 5th anniversary. It's not like Kelly doesn't contribute. She manages the home and works at a travel agency, though the pay isn't exceptional. As for me, I dedicate 40 hours a week to a customer service job where I'm constantly on the phone addressing complaints or processing orders for our clients. It can become monotonous, but the pay is decent, and we enjoy a great benefits package. I earn $18 per hour, with monthly commission checks and a bonus every 6 months based on the company's overall performance. Typically, my commission checks exceed my hourly wage. On top of that, I work part-time at the fast food place, handling orders and transactions. It may sound mundane, and at times it is, but it's a welcome break from my regular routine. I've been juggling both jobs for almost 2 years, and it's starting to wear on me. On the positive side, I've stabilized our finances and saved a substantial amount for a house down payment, bringing in over $7,000 a month before taxes. My plan is to eventually quit the second job once our financial situation allows. After our upcoming anniversary cruise, I intend to reassess our finances. Due to my schedule, Kelly has been handling the bills for the past year, and so far she seems to have things under control. Through her job, Kelly secured tickets for a 5-day Caribbean cruise for us at a significant discount. Consequently, I indulged and upgraded to a suite with a balcony and a pleasant ocean view. I eagerly anticipated spending quality time alone with her on the open water. Both of us arranged to take vacation simultaneously, set to depart after work tomorrow, which happened to be Friday. I trudged up the stairs to our apartment and opened the door. The place was dark, and I couldn't hear anything except the clock on the wall. Strange, I thought. Kelly didn't mention not being home. Placing the mail on the table, I flipped the light switch. The place was clean and tidy as usual, but something felt amiss. "Kelly, I'm home," I called out, receiving no response. Entering the kitchen, I noticed nothing prepared. Typically, she leaves a covered plate in the refrigerator on days I return home late, but there was nothing. In the bedroom, the bed was made up, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my phone and attempted to call, but it went straight to voicemail. "Kelly, this is Sam," I said. "By the way, Sam Carmichael, where are you? I'm at the apartment, please call me." I hung up and sent a text, receiving no response. In the closet, I noticed several items missing from her side. Where could she have gone, I wondered. Did she leave me? Opening her dresser drawers, I noticed some of her things were gone. In the bathroom, most of her toiletries were missing. Then I saw it, an envelope on the bathroom counter, addressed to me in her handwriting, shaky. I grabbed the envelope and opened it. Moving to the living room, I sat down and read her letter. The letter began without the usual "Dear Sam," just Sam. This didn't bode well. As I continued reading, it conveyed that she was aware this might be difficult for me to comprehend and anticipated my anger. She expressed a desire to explain that she had been involved in an affair for the past several months and was currently with the other person on the cruise we had planned for our anniversary. She mentioned our discussions about having children, but confessed that she didn't want to have children with me. She acknowledged my qualities as a hard worker and provider, stating that I would make a wonderful father to whatever children she had. She revealed that she had stopped taking contraception at her lover's request for the last 3 weeks to ensure he would be the one to get her pregnant. She apologized for the coldness of her words and assured me that her lover, Jake, was a good man in more ways than one. According to her, everyone at work was aware of their relationship and supported their decision to go away together. The letter continued, stating that her colleagues believed I would be an excellent father to the children Jake and she planned to have. She admitted to having fallen in love with Jake, but clarified that it was not the same love she felt for me as a husband. She likened her current feelings to the love between close friends or siblings. Despite this shift in emotions, she expressed that she did not desire a divorce and believed it would be best for us to remain married. This way, our combined insurances could cover her pregnancies, and I could raise Jake's children. The letter outlined changes for the future, including spending nights at Jake's place and him spending nights at our place. It suggested I find alternative accommodations on those nights, possibly by considering a third job to keep busy while they were together. She mentioned that love-making relations between us would no longer occur, as Jake insisted on exclusivity and I no longer excited her. Acknowledging the potential for anger and contemplation of divorce, the letter warned of the legal consequences, assuring me that pursuing divorce would result in securing retirement benefits, half of my paycheck, and child support. Despite recognizing the pain, the letter conveyed that a part of her was hurting too. She and Jake decided to take the cruise using the tickets I had purchased, blocking my number to prevent calls or texts. They planned to share pictures and videos to show what I was missing and ensure her safety. The letter concluded by stating that she had to go as the taxi was waiting, and she was meeting Jake at the airport. They opted to leave a day early for a less tiring start to their cruise. She promised to contact me upon their return and I could pick her up again. The letter expressed regret but stated that this was the way things had to be from now on. It was signed, "Your friend Kelly." I sat in shock as the letter slipped from my hand. Friend? What was that about? With a friend like Kelly who needed enemies, I pondered. Yes, things had seemed off these past months, but I thought it was due to my schedule. That's why I invested in that cruise. The more I mulled over that letter, the angrier I became. I yanked the ring off my finger and hurled it across the room. To hell with her and her ridiculous notions. If she believed I would sit here and accept this, she was out of her mind. I glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. With only 5 hours until my day job, I knew I'd get just a few hours of sleep. Contemplating sleeping in the bed, thoughts of her with this Jake guy flooded my mind. Opting for the couch, I grabbed a pillow and an Afghan and lay down. Too exhausted to stay awake, I drifted off, only to wake the next day wondering why I was on the couch. Reality hit when I remembered the previous night. Checking my phone, I hoped for a message deeming it a joke, but sadly that wasn't the case. Dragging myself to the bathroom, I showered, dressed, and hastily grabbed a cup of coffee for the road. Attempting to set aside personal problems at work proved challenging, especially listening to others complain about perceived issues. Though I did my best, colleagues noticed my distracted state. After lunch, my supervisor, Wanda, called me into her office, a signal that there was an issue. She expressed genuine concern, motioning for me to close the door. Wanda inquired about my well-being, asking if everything was okay at home, and suggested that I consider quitting the fast food job since I was already working 2 jobs. After a moment of consideration, I decided to open up about my situation. I confessed to Wanda that everything was not okay at home. Trusting her previous openness, I felt she deserved to know the details. She asked me to share, and in response, I retrieved the letter Kelly left and handed it over. Wanda read the letter, and when she finished, she returned it, shaking her head. She empathetically stated that we needed me to have my head completely in the game at work. She mentioned hearing from some colleagues who informed her about my short-tempered and snippy behavior that morning. After reading the letter, she expressed understanding of the challenges I was facing. Realizing I had vacation scheduled for the next week, she suggested I take the rest of the day off with comp time. Additionally, she offered to refer me to someone and wrote down the name and number of the attorney she used in her divorce. Handing me the information, she mentioned that she had been in a similar situation and encouraged me to give the attorney a call. Informing her that Wanda recommended her, grateful for the advice, I expressed my thanks. She encouraged me to take the next week to sort things out and return with a clear mind. She added a light-hearted comment saying, "And remember, there's lots of fish out there." To which I acknowledged, "I hear you, Wanda." I thanked her again, and then I shut down my desk, informing my cubemate that I would be back in a week or so. He waved as I left. Upon reaching my car, I retrieved the note Wanda provided and dialed the number. The receptionist at the law offices of Hawkins and Bladeau answered, inquiring about the purpose of my call. I requested to speak with Linda Hawkins, mentioning that Wanda Green had recommended her to me. The receptionist placed me on hold and returned after a couple of minutes, informing me that Miss Hawkins was scheduled to be in court that afternoon but had an open slot at 4 p.m. She asked if that would work for me, and I confirmed that it would be perfect. I inquired about the office location, and after jotting down the address, I thanked the receptionist and ended the call. Checking the time, I realized I had enough time to visit the travel agency where Kelly worked. I hoped to intervene and, if possible, seek a refund for our plans. Upon reaching the agency, parking the car, and entering, the 4 other women in the main office glanced up, their expressions hinting at their awareness of the situation. I approached the front desk where Julie, the receptionist, sat. She greeted me, and I stated my intention to see Kelly. Glancing around, Julie informed me that Kelly wasn't present that day. She handed me a large envelope, explaining that Kelly had informed them that I knew, and asked her to give me the envelope if I came in. The other women wore smirks, leaving me uncertain about how much they knew. Upon opening the envelope, I was hit by the mixture of Kelly's scent, urine, and an unfamiliar odor. Inside, I found a pair of her soaking wet underwear, folded up. Repulsed, I used a pencil to inspect further and discovered her rings, covered in a white, gooey substance, unmistakably Jake's seed fluid. At the bottom of the envelope there was also a USB drive. Disgusted, I confronted Julie, who smirked. As I looked around, I noticed the other women doing the same. I asked if they found it funny, and Julie, embarrassed, looked away. She explained that the thumb drive contained pictures and videos from a bon voyage party they had organized for Kelly and Jake the previous afternoon, with Kelly suggesting that I would enjoy them. An older woman emerged from the back and leaned against the front office wall, observing me. She informed me that Kelly and Jake had already left and that everyone at the agency was aware of their relationship. When I asked if they approved of it, she shrugged and asked what I wanted. I stated my desire for a refund, explaining that I had paid for the cruise and wanted my money back. Since I didn't have the tickets, she replied that the tickets were non-refundable and mentioned that it was nice of me to let Kelly put one in Jake's name. I disputed that claim, asserting that what Kelly did was fraudulent and insisted on getting my money back. However, she refused, saying it wouldn't happen. In frustration, I declared that I would take legal action, suing the agency and everyone involved. As I turned to leave, Julie stopped me, apologizing for the situation and explaining that Kelly had led them to believe I approved of her actions. She urged me to let Kelly have the cruise, emphasizing that there would be other opportunities. Curious about Julie's relationship status, I asked if she was married, and she responded negatively. I then expressed the pain of being betrayed by someone claiming to love me and warned her of the potential future pain she might experience. I emphasized my disdain for Kelly and left with a harsh message for Julie to relay. I told Julie to inform Kelly that I hated her and never wanted to see her again. I added a shock statement, expressing the hope that she rots and dies of AIDS. Julie and the others appeared shocked, and I concluded by announcing my intention to see them all in court before leaving. Before anyone could respond, with a couple of hours before my appointment at Linda's office, I parked in a shady spot at a park and took a nap in my car after setting my phone's clock. Reflecting on the lack of justice in the world, I asked myself, is there no justice in the world? The nap provided some relief, but my neck felt stiff and sore when I sat up in the driver's seat. After sipping lukewarm coffee, I started the car. Upon reaching the building housing Linda's office, I checked my appearance in the mirror. I looked worn out. Attempting to tidy my hair, I grabbed Kelly's letter in the envelope from Julie before heading inside. In the office, a pleasant blonde receptionist took my name and directed me to a seat. She offered a cup of fresh coffee, which I gratefully accepted. A few minutes later, she led me to Linda's office and closed the door behind me. Linda Hawkins, older than me but still quite attractive, stood up and extended her hand, which I accepted. She greeted me, expressing pleasure in meeting me, and suggested I have a seat. I thanked her and took a seat, responding that she could call me Sam. She acknowledged with a slight smile and encouraged me to address her as Linda. Asking about the purpose of my visit, I informed her that I wanted to explore the possibility of getting a divorce. Linda questioned my reason, and I explained that my wife was cheating on me. To emphasize the gravity of the situation, I handed her the letter Kelly had left for me. Linda read the letter, frowning as she did so, and then handed it back to me, inquiring about the envelope. I passed it to her, cautioning her about its contents. She opened it, reacting with a contorted face due to the unpleasant odor. After closing it back up, she handed it to me and expressed understanding, stating that she didn't blame me for wanting a divorce. She asked about my goals in the divorce, to which I asserted that I wanted essentially everything. I revealed a desire for her to face consequences for her actions, noting not only the infidelity but also the agency's involvement in defrauding me of more than $2,000. She acknowledged my lack of knowledge about divorce laws and mentioned that the family court system in the state prioritizes economics over justice. Linda, expressing gratitude for the recommendation, explained that having no children was advantageous in divorce proceedings, as divorce is often hardest on children. When I mentioned that we were renting a one-bedroom apartment and working extra to save for a down payment on a house, Linda noted that it was one less thing to deal with. She inquired about my wife's employment at AA Travel Agency, asking about her income. I disclosed that she earned about the same as my base pay, approximately $18 an hour. Linda explained that the court might order me to provide support for a couple of years unless she remarried, and we would likely have to split all assets, including any retirement plans. Regarding her infidelity, Linda clarified that it couldn't be mentioned in the papers due to the state being a no-fault state. However, it might be used in negotiations. When asked about counseling, I expressed that I had not considered it as there was no way to move past the situation. Linda mentioned that the court might still order counseling, and I inquired about the threat of my wife bringing her lover into the apartment. Linda inquired about my wife's ability to bring people into the apartment, asking if her name was on the lease, and I confirmed that it was. She explained that unless there were threats of damage, there was nothing I could do to prevent her from inviting people into the apartment, as she lived there as well. I expressed frustration at the situation, and Linda acknowledged that divorce is challenging, describing it as something one gets. I chuckled at her comment. Linda suggested that my wife might have a change of heart upon her return and reconsider the marriage. She proposed the idea of a legal separation to allow for a cooling down period, and if I still wanted a divorce after that, we could proceed. Linda also advised me to consider quitting the second job, as earning more money could lead to increased financial demands. She noted that I seemed to have been overextending myself for a while. Expressing my frustration, I asked about getting a refund for the cruise. Linda assured me that we could explore options to address that issue. We discussed the particulars, and Linda made notes as we talked. When we finished, she handed me a checklist of things to do, most of it dealing with the bank. I shook her hand and left, stopping at the front desk to leave a retainer on my way out. I still felt like crap about the whole situation, but at least I was doing something about it. I considered quitting the second job. It was wearing me out anyway, so I decided to go in and talk to the manager tomorrow and give my notice. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and made the changes Linda suggested. I paid off the joint credit card Kelly had and canceled it. Then, I emptied out half of all our joint accounts and put it into the separate account I had already set up for the bonuses and commissions. Kelly didn't have access to that account anyway, so I figured it would be safe. I had planned to use that money for a house, but those plans were out the window. I got home, grabbed the mail out of the mailbox, then ate some leftover meatloaf Kelly had made a few days earlier. She had a habit of cooking large dishes, then freezing what we didn't eat for later. It took a while to thaw, but that was okay by me. I sat down with my dinner and looked through the mail, mostly junk, crap, and advertised flyers addressed to occupant or resident, except for one piece that looked like a handwritten invitation with detailed calligraphy. Addressed to me personally, from something called Ramusa Gallery. I'd never heard of it and nearly tossed it as well, but I felt compelled to open it. What I found was an invitation to a private art showing. I wasn't sure if this was something Kelly signed me up for or not. She had always tried to get me interested in the arts, but I frankly just didn't have much time with my work schedule. The invitation said I should be there at 9:30 a.m. sharp. As I looked at the invitation, I felt as though this was something I needed to do. Don't ask me to explain it. I put the invitation on the refrigerator door with a magnet and decided to go. If nothing else, it might take my mind off my problems for a bit. I wore a pair of latex gloves and opened the envelope provided by Julie earlier, overcoming the unpleasant smell emanating from its contents. I retrieved the underwear, noticing the ring resting in the wettest section. Placing them in a plastic sandwich bag, I sealed it tightly. I wiped down the USB drive with wipes, uncertain if it would make a difference, but opting for caution given the enclosed items. Setting up my laptop, I inserted the drive, anticipating I might not appreciate its contents, and my intuition proved correct. The folder contained pictures featuring Kelly alongside a man, presumably Jake, enjoying drinks and socializing with office friends. Jake's hands were prominently on her in the photos, and the other girls wore smiles. More images depicted Jake's closeness, while other girls, even their supervisor, watched. The penultimate picture showed Kelly over a toilet bowl, undressed, with two girls holding her underwear, one of them being Julie. In the underwear's midst were her rings, the ones I had placed on her finger almost 5 years ago. Examining the photos, I could discern a stream soaking the undergarment and the gold rings. The final picture portrayed Kelly, still undressed over the toilet, underwear and rings underneath her, smiling into the camera as she waved. The others joined in, smiling and waving with her. I had never felt so humiliated in my life. Soon after, a surge of something else overwhelmed me, hatred. At that moment, I despised her with every fiber of my being. Exiting that folder, I explored another containing several video files. Reluctantly previewing them, I was more focused on hearing what she and the others had to say rather than witnessing her with this individual. I reached the last video, curious about the reason behind her actions with the rings. Starting the video, I observed her adjusting herself over the bowl as others brought in the underwear. Kelly removed her rings as Julie and another girl extended her underwear beneath. They handed her rings to the older woman, who carefully placed them on the garment to prevent them from falling into the toilet. Jake inquired if she was ready, and Kelly, expressing a need to use the bathroom, looked directly into the camera, stating her intention and expressing her feelings towards our marriage. She instructed one of the girls to bring in the envelope, emphasizing the inclusion of photos and videos. Kelly directed Julie to ensure that I received the envelope if I came by the next day. Julie agreed to do so, and Kelly bid me farewell, waving along with the others. After the waves, Jake turned to the camera, assuring that he would take care of Kelly in my absence, and making a derogatory comment about me paying for everything. The video concluded, leaving me with a nauseating feeling. I wasn't typically a violent man, but at that moment, I wanted to eliminate the lot of them with my bare hands and feed the pieces to the dogs. I put my head in my hands for a bit. I was too shaken and angry to cry. All I wanted to do was lash out and hurt someone. Something, anything would do. I couldn't, for the life of me, understand why she would do this to me. I had never cheated on her, never hurt her in any way. All I ever did was work so that we could have a good life together. All she had to do was tell me I was working too many hours, and I would have cut back. But she didn't. I had a thought and pulled up the agency's website. I found it was part of a much larger organization based out of New York and had offices across the country. So I looked and found an email address for the CEO and the chairman of the board. I wrote an email threatening a lawsuit and attached copies of the video, then sent it off. I looked around and saw the pictures of Kelly and me on the end tables and on the wall. I lost it and tore them all down, ripping her image out of every one of them. I was looking for something else to destroy when I heard the doorbell ring. Who is that? I wondered. I looked through the peephole and saw Julie with another woman from Kelly's office. I couldn't remember her name at the moment. I opened the door. I growled at them, and they jumped back, shocked at my anger. Julie begged to talk, and I questioned their motives, expressing my reluctance to hear anything they had to say. Julie asked if they could come inside, and I pulled out my phone to start a voice recording. Opening the door, I let them in and sat down on the couch, demanding to know the reason for their visit. When asked if they could have something to drink, I declined, urging them to say what they came to say and leave. Julie exchanged nervous glances with the others before conveying that she had talked to Kelly earlier, who was very upset. I responded indifferently and sarcastically suggested that they could make it up to me by drastic actions. They stared at me in shock, and Julie protested that I couldn't mean such things, reminding me that Kelly was my wife. In response, I handed her the letter Kelly left for me. Julie read it, and after returning it to me, she apologized. I accused them of being complicit in Kelly's actions and criticized their behavior in the video. Julie apologized again, stating that Kelly misled them into thinking I was okay with it. Expressing my dissatisfaction, I told them it was time to leave. After a while, they turned for the door, but Julie turned back before leaving, suggesting that she could help me get over this. I dismissed the idea, emphasizing that I couldn't trust her, and urged them to leave and never return. They left, and I locked the door behind them. Later, I decided to drown my sorrows. I drove to the convenience store on the corner, purchased a 6-pack of beer and a couple of packs of cigarettes. I had quit drinking and smoking when we got married, but I decided to hell with it. Upon my return, I sat on the balcony, drank my beer, and ended up smoking several cigarettes before deciding to turn in for the night. The next day, I got up, showered, washed the beer and cigarette taste out of my mouth, dressed and headed out. Looking online, I got directions to the gallery and realized I had just about enough time to get there by 9:30, so I headed out after making a cup of coffee for the road. I pulled up to the Victorian house at the address on the invitation and was a bit surprised to see no other cars. Surely others would have been invited to this showing, I thought. Exiting the car, I approached the door. Before I could knock, it swung open, revealing a petite blonde woman in her early 20s. She greeted me as Mr. Carmichael, mentioning that I was right on time. Introducing herself as Dr. Adrestia Ramusa, she extended her hand, and I shook it. She confirmed that I was the only one attending the meeting and guided me into a room with a covered portrait on an easel, instructing me to take a seat. She uncovered the portrait, cautioning that it might be shocking. As she lifted the cover, I saw a painting of Kelly lying in a strange bed, with Jake beside her. Dr. Ramusa apologized and covered the portrait again. I questioned how she obtained the painting, and whether Kelly was behind this, expressing my lack of amusement. She clarified that Kelly had not put her up to it and suggested we go to her office for an explanation. I followed her upstairs into an office filled with old books and scrolls. She pointed to a chair in front of her cluttered desk, instructing me to sit while she made tea. Confused about how tea could make the situation better, I sat down, still in shock. Dr. Ramusa handed me a cup of tea, ensuring that I drank it. Strangely, I began to feel a bit better after a few sips. She smiled and sat down at her desk, and I demanded an explanation for what was happening. She nodded and explained that she helps people like me get justice. She had been watching my wife for some time and became actively involved after Kelly wrote the letter to me. She asked if I had any idea about what was going on, and I admitted that I didn't. I interrogated how she found out about the letter, questioning if she was trailing or spying on us, and if she was a private investigator. She replied that she wasn't precisely a private investigator, but explained that overseeing all marriages was her expertise for many years. She asked me to watch a video on the monitor, which appeared to be taken in my apartment. The video showed Kelly writing the letter at the kitchen table, and below it, words scrolled through, reflecting Kelly's thoughts as she wrote. The words revealed her intention to prevent me from filing for divorce, and her plan to counter by citing cruelty or misuse, as advised by Jake. I asked about the words below the video, and Adrestia explained that they were Kelly's thoughts as she wrote the letter. I questioned how it was possible, and she simply stated that it was proprietary. I asserted that Kelly's claim of misuse was a lie, as I had never done anything like that. Adrestia acknowledged that she knew, but unfortunately, in this state, the court would be more inclined to believe Kelly than me, and she was aware of that fact. I remarked that my lawyer didn't mention the details Adrestia shared. She acknowledged that lawyers in the system were the real winners in divorces, and emphasized that seeking justice or fair treatment was futile. Adrestia revealed that Kelly had informed Jake about her plan during a video on the monitor, showing them snuggling together in plane seats. Jake asked if she left the letter for me, and she admitted to it. He predicted my reaction and questioned what she would do when I filed for divorce. She responded that her lawyer would claim I smacked and misused her, even though she didn't mention it in the letter. The video ended, leaving me stunned. Expressing disbelief, I questioned how she could fabricate such a story without consequences. Adrestia explained that people pull off such things all the time. I then expressed confusion about Kelly's motives, highlighting my faithfulness, consistent provision, and hard work for our future. Adrestia suggested that perhaps I'd been too focused on finances and not spending enough time with her, though she clarified that it didn't justify Kelly's actions. I mentioned that Kelly could have communicated with me, and I would have given up the second job if I knew this would happen. Adrestia responded that there was no assurance this wouldn't have occurred anyway. I inquired about her suggestions for my course of action. She proposed assisting me in seeking some form of justice and asked if I would be open to that. I affirmed my willingness, seeking more details on how it could be done. Adrestia reminded me of my notion from the previous night, wearing a mischievous grin. Perplexed, I asked what she was referring to. She maintained the mischievous smile, rose from behind her desk and approached me, taking my hand. She signaled for me to stand and mentioned that their ship had already sailed early that morning. I acknowledged that I knew, having paid for the cruise. Adrestia agreed, suggesting that we should pay them a visit. Astonished, I wondered how we could accomplish that. She smiled as she held my hand. Suddenly, we found ourselves standing on the deck of a massive cruise ship. I glanced around and saw a few people on the deck, but I did spot Kelly and the idiot standing by the railing. She wore a tiny two-piece bikini that left little to the imagination. They were locked in an embrace, and Kelly was caressing the front of his suit. I cleared my throat to get their attention. Kelly expressed surprise and questioned how I got there and who was with me. I responded, stating that I represented justice and was there to ensure she paid for what she had done to her husband. Kelly and Jake chuckled at my statement. In a threatening tone, Jake demanded to know what I intended to do. As they started walking toward us, they slipped on something, lost their balance, and tumbled over the railing. I rushed to the railing and Adrestia joined me. We peered over the railing and Adrestia restrained me. Initially, I didn't comprehend why. Just as they descended about 15 feet, the largest shark I could ever imagine emerged from the water, its mouth wide open, revealing rows of large jagged teeth. The mouth of this creature had to be easily 30 feet wide. I couldn't recall ever feeling so terrified as I looked. Kelly screamed loudly, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, both she and Jake were in the shark's mouth. The monster closed its mouth, sending geysers of blood back up to the deck. Then it silently slipped back under the water. I heard cries from the deck and observed other passengers vomiting on the deck. Some had phones out, likely recording videos. Adrestia pulled me back, and I heard the klaxon blaring. Crew members hurried to the railing to assess if there was anything salvageable, but it was too late. Adrestia grabbed my hand, and suddenly, we were back in her office. I felt nauseated, but she swiftly held my head in her hands, and the nausea subsided almost immediately. I expressed shock and inquired if the events genuinely happened. Adrestia seated me back in the chair and poured another cup of tea. She confirmed that it did happen, handing me the tea and suggesting that it would help. I took a sip of the tea and immediately felt much improved. I was still grappling with what I had just witnessed, but the sense of shock had dissipated. Simultaneously, I noticed something else. I felt no remorse whatsoever, no sadness, nothing. I felt nothing for what transpired with Kelly and Jake. I looked at Adrestia, seeking answers. Adrestia informed me that the tea provided would help me cope with the situation, and indeed, I felt much better after finishing it. Despite the fact that I was once deeply in love with Kelly, there was an absence of sadness over her demise, leading me to question my emotions. Addressing my concern, Adrestia reassured me not to worry about any lack of emotion, attributing it to a side effect of the tea that numbs negative emotions. Curious about Kelly's whereabouts, I inquired, acknowledging that I understood she was deceased. Adrestia acknowledged my religious upbringing, noting that I likely wondered about the afterlife. She invited me to follow her back to the showroom where she had unveiled the portrait. There, she uncovered the painting, revealing a drastic change. The portrait now depicted Kelly's face frozen in fear, her eyes wide, her mouth open in an eternal scream. Behind her face was the shark's maw, row after row of sharp teeth awaiting her. Adrestia gestured toward the painting, stating that it represented where Kelly was now, forever captured in her final moments. She explained that Kelly would spend eternity in that portrayal, regretting her decision to wrong me, a sort of self-made hell. As she hung the portrait on a vacant spot on the wall among rows of similar paintings, Adrestia revealed that all the individuals depicted were cheaters, each one regretting their decisions for eternity. I expressed my realization, and she confirmed, emphasizing that this was her concept of justice. She had been carrying out this work for a significant period, and the walls were not even halfway filled. Curious about the duration of her endeavor, I inquired. And Adrestia responded that she had been engaged in this work for a longer time than I could imagine. Expressing a sense of sadness, she took my head in her hands and looked at me intently. For a moment, I thought I saw a tear in her eye. Adrestia mentioned that the upcoming days would be challenging, but assured me that she would always be with me, residing in my heart regardless of age. She encouraged me to go on and live a long life, suggesting the possibility of finding a new love, as she believed someone was waiting for me. After a kiss on the cheek, I felt content, and even now I can't fully explain the feeling. She accompanied me to the door and closed it behind me after I left. Shaken, I drove to my second job and turned in my notice. The manager wasn't too upset, but he understood and wished me well. We left on a good note, and he said he would have my final check mailed to me. I drove back home, grabbed a beer, and sat in front of the television for a while. I thought it strange that I still didn't feel any remorse over Kelly's demise. I turned on the television and found that the video of the shark incident had already made the news. It turned out that several people had taken video of what happened. As I flipped through the channels, I saw that several news programs were already talking about the feasibility that such a large beast could exist. All of the reports said they were still waiting for the identity of the victims to be released. Going online, I found that the video of the shark had also gone viral on social media. It was everywhere. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. I couldn't watch the video, so I turned my computer off. I grabbed a pile of trash bags and went through the apartment, collecting all of Kelly's things. Before long, I had everything packed up and stuffed in her car. I called her mother and told her that she needed to come get it. "Why, Sam?" she asked. I told her about Kelly's cheating, but didn't tell her about Kelly getting eaten by a giant shark. She was understandably upset and said she and Kelly's father would be by to pick it all up. Later that day, they came by, and after making a tearful plea to patch things up with her, I made it clear that no reconciliation was possible. I still didn't tell them about her getting eaten. I figured they would learn about that soon enough. After they left, I dressed and went to a bar and grill where I consumed a juicy burger and several beers. I got through the rest of the weekend somehow and woke up late Monday. Since I was technically on vacation, I sat in front of the television with a bowl of cereal as a news report came on, saying the offices of AA Travel Agency had been destroyed by fire. According to the report, everyone got out okay, but just barely. An hour or so later, I got a call from Julie, who was more than a bit shaken up. She informed me about the office burning down, recounting the strange incident where Kelly's desk spontaneously caught fire. They narrowly escaped the flames. She mentioned receiving a peculiar text from Kelly just before the fire, containing references to sharks and the hounds of hell. Julie expressed confusion about the message, to which I replied that I had no idea. The conversation ended, and I sat back smiling to myself. I took a drive to see Adrestia and asked her about the fire, but the Victorian mansion that housed her gallery was gone. I sat there and looked at the empty lot, wondering what happened. After a while, I shook my head and drove home. Update: after a couple of weeks, I received word from the cruise line about Kelly's demise. They conveyed the news of her passing and included a check covering the cost of my tickets, along with the payout from the accidental death and dismemberment policy linked to the tickets. I reached out to Linda, informing her that our separation was no longer necessary. While she offered condolences, they held no significance for me. A few weeks later, the travel agency's headquarters contacted me. They proposed a substantial sum of money in exchange for my silence and a commitment not to pursue legal action. Additionally, they revealed that the entire office where Kelly worked had been terminated, with considerations for a new team in their revamped office. After contemplating their offer, I decided to accept it. Kelly's parents organized a memorial service for their daughter, but I opted not to attend or send flowers. Although they were displeased, they acknowledged my feelings. Life continued, and it took quite some time before I resumed dating. With the elimination of my second job, I began frequenting the gym to regain fitness. The effort paid off, attracting attention from several women at my workplace. While I went on a few dates, I refrained from committing to a relationship. It took a couple of years before I felt ready to trust another woman at that level. Eventually, I found someone, Marcy, a CO worker who went through a divorce after discovering her husband in their marital bed. We've been dating for a while now, and I'm seriously contemplating proposing to her. All in all, life is looking up. As for Adrestia, she moved on to the next case that came her way. One day, however, she sat down at her desk and took a long look at everything, the pain, the anguish, and the pleas for help. Overwhelmed, she put her head in her hands and did something she hadn't done for 2 millennia. She wept.
Story 2.
Cheating ex-wife faces karma as I find new happiness. She loses money, job, and spirals into chaos. Summary: she cheated on me after 14 years of marriage. Affair with married coworker. She admitted it after a month, just had to leave. I know she was remorseful, begged and begged me to stay. She did not contest the divorce or my settlement terms. She continued to be a good mom, and our relationship is pretty good. Of course, we both had a hard time. We were both mourning the end of the marriage for quite a while. We just kept doing our thing as single parents. Before the holidays, I started seeing someone, not serious, more friends. She has a daughter. We recently began talking about introducing each other to our kids. They know nothing about us. So I texted my ex and let her know as a courtesy. She immediately calls, and I can tell she's upset. I said that you're seeing other people, and I am as well. This was bound to happen. She's now crying, so she screams that she has not seen anyone, not even one date. Not sure I believe that. Said that she was sad, and now a bit angry. She asked that I not have her spend the night when the kids are there, and she's not ready to see her, so please don't bring her around. Wow, okay. Again, just friends. An hour later, she texts me and apologizes. I thanked her. An hour after that, she texts that she deserves this. I do not need any vindictive BS cheerleading here. I'm still the head of this broken family and still need to lead as a father. What do I need to do here to manage this? My new girlfriend is rock solid and will not allow any toxicity in her life, neither do I. I'm proud of getting this crap show settled down and need some input to keep it that way. Thank you. An opinion from the community goes like this. You're not the head of a broken family. You're a father and a CO parent. She is not your responsibility. She has to get herself in a good place. You did right to inform her, but it is a courtesy. Figure out what you believe to be reasonable and stick to it. Honestly, you did her the courtesy of telling her, but you didn't really have to. It's really none of her business. Yeah, maybe if it had gotten more serious to the point where you wanted to introduce your girlfriend to your kids, that I can see having to tell her and it being more of a big deal. But she really has no right to be angry at you moving on and seeing someone when she was the one who decided to light your marriage on fire. Update: wayward spouse life then and now. Summary of ex-wife's accomplishments during the first 13 years of marriage. Raised 2 wonderful kids, earned a college degree, beautiful home, great career, loving husband. Last 3 years: affair, dumped, divorce, joint custody, small apartment, laid off, alone. Had some challenges with wife being a little too intrusive in my life. My buddy put this in perspective. By the way, if you read my other posts, she's been leaving me. Alone. My life isn't great either, but I'm finally at peace. Hang in there. Another community reaction says, I have seen this reaction a few times. I had my fun, but you ended the marriage. I was going to come back eventually. Now nobody wants me, and I blame you for that. I'm alone, and you could not wait for me. Boo-hoo. Yeah, sorry. Karma took a major bite out of your butt, and now you pay. I have a sister-in-law, to be honest. She's nuts. She kicked the husband out. She was having it off with one of his friends. Hubby was a total mess. He ballooned in weight, started screwing up at work. He found a really good psychiatrist. Soon he was back in the gym. He dropped a huge amount. He moved back in with his parents till he could figure out the direction. Then he did. He had been promoted at work, bought a nice condo, was dressing better. Then he meets a girl. He introduces her to my wife and me. I cannot be happier for him. Sister-in-law, who's been through a few guys while the divorce is progressing, sees that. A, he looks like $1,000,000. B, has his own home and a nice car. C, is dating someone completely out of his league. In short, she has a crap fit. Calls him up, "How dare you betray me?" He says, "Sorry, we gave it the office," and hangs up. Sister-in-law goes on a campaign, slags both of them. My wife nearly rolled up a newspaper to smack her over the nose at a family dinner. My wife rises, points to her sister, and tells her to leave the poor bugger alone. "You are the one with the hot pants. You were the one who could not wait to jump on another guy's dick. He saved himself from you. Now leave him alone." Her sister goes, "I can't. I have to be the winner, not him." Mother-in-law says, "Stop or find another place to live." Sister-in-law goes, "Mommy, he makes me look stupid." My mother-in-law goes, "You are stupid. You threw him away like you used Kleenex. He fixes himself and you hate it. I'm so disappointed in you." Cheaters have a hard time when their spouses actually move on. It really kills them to see their spouse happy without them. If you're a parent, you're already miles ahead of your ex and totally winning at life. Update: Mother's Day fiasco. Man, I screwed up. Not in the least intentional, swear. Screw up number 1, had the kids Saturday and dropped them off for Mother's Day to be with their mom. We've been quarantined for weeks with beaches closed. They're now open. Saturday was beautiful weather. The kids and I spent the day at the beach, had a blast. I guess that was her big plan for Mother's Day. She never told me her plans, and I never really thought about it. Screw up number 2, have a friend of sorts that I've been seeing. Thought I was discreet in building a nice Mother's Day gift basket for her. My kids have never met her. I guess the kids somehow found it, it was in my closet, and thought it was my gift to their mom, evidently. They told her all about it, so ex called to tell me how disappointed she was that we went to the beach. I apologized. At first she was okay, then she thanked me for the gift and couldn't wait to see it. Blurted out, "I didn't get you a gift." It got ugly. I feel bad for her. At the same time, when she had the affair, she never once considered how her future may look. Believe me, I had an arsenal of jabs I could have laid into her with, but I didn't. Are you a mind reader? No. How are you supposed to know what her plans were? Like you said, she never considered you when she was off with another man, so stop the pity party. You have nothing to feel guilty for. The fact that she still has you feeling guilty means you're still wrapped around her little finger. Update: divorce. The affair fog is your friend. Just sharing a personal reflection based on what I experienced. Please don't think I was this smart. Just more lucky in hindsight, I guess. 48 male, 14 years married, betrayed spouse, 2 years divorced. Discovered the affair. She was remorseful, at the same time never broke contact. After a month, decided to file. She went all in with affair partner. Painful as hell emotionally. I pushed like hell to get the divorce finalized. Just want it out. The sooner it's over, the sooner I can start fresh. So, in hindsight, I made all the money. She was so absolutely lust-struck, she made the most stupid decisions on her divorce mediation. She disengaged, flippant, so immersed in the fog. Affair partner seemed well off. Maybe she felt he could take care of her, didn't grasp what it would cost her to be on her own, what she thought she could earn to even come close to her living standards. And that's with alimony. Couple of years, that will be gone. My attorney was dumbfounded. It's already starting. She texted the other night to ask how to take money out of her 401k, told her no clue, won't touch it until I retire. Oh, affair partner dumped her a few months post-divorce. Thought I'd mention that. So, after reading a lot of posts, I thought I'd share. I suppose there are some who are successful in waiting out the affair, somehow reconciling or whatever. I guess that can be a good thing. If you're not heading down the reconciliation road, act fast. Maybe you'll get lucky like me. Now we've got a couple of reactions in the community. What a pleasing karmic story. I wish I followed your advice. We still maintained an amicable divorce, but I think it would have thrown gasoline into this relationship if I had been stronger at the beginning. Now they're legit dating, and she is the amazingly supportive new coworker girlfriend. Someone else chimes in. Glad to hear you weren't financially abused trying to get away from the person emotionally abusing you. My story is similar. 17 years married, 3 kids, 0 remorse on D-Day, and said she wouldn't end it with a fair partner. It took me a little over 3 months of settling up my finances to be ready to file and kick her out. Waited another 3 months until she moved in with the affair partner, and I had been caring for the kids solo before I had her served fault state. We're now 1 year after filing and paperwork assigned with final court date on Monday. She gets kids every other weekend, no alimony, and pays me child support. Her divorce settlement will keep her okay on finances for 2 to 3 years with her spending habits. After that, she's screwed. Affair partner making $18 an hour, paying his ex child support on 2 kids, can't be much help financially. This is going to get real entertaining soon. One more person chimes in, another winner that rolled the dice and lost. My best friend was jettisoned by his wife. She was convinced that she could do better. She had a few affairs with more senior men at work, tried bullying her husband into not peering behind the curtain. Too bad his good friends did. She had no idea that she had been caught until the morning she was asked to attend the offices of her HR department. They moved the meeting to the boardroom. First, her most recent affair partner trooped in and stared daggers at her. Then the previous 2, also staring daggers. Then it hit her. Her husband came into the meeting. She attempted to communicate, but he shook his head at her. VP of HR walked into the meeting, and it was rather curt. All of you have broken the code of conduct. As a consequence, the company can no longer offer you employment. You will be given 2 weeks in lieu of notice. You will not get any bonuses or other compensation in line with corporate policy. The 3 men rose, one spat at her, and left. She was glued to her seat. My buddy spoke up. I tied a can to your tail, which ended all of your playmates. Your mom and dad have the evidence as well. He hands her a card. Give this to your lawyer. She holds the card as if it is a poisonous viper. He says, the divorce is being processed as we speak. Please never talk to me again. He walked out. Next time he saw her was in family court. After the review of the case the judge gave him, she stood up and screamed that she was the mother. The judge said she did not present a very motherly image. Her telling him to F off pretty much screwed her case. The judge was so angry that he said he should have recused himself, but instead, he said, if I get overturned on appeal, then so be it. He did not give her child support or spousal. People always think the grass is greener on the other side, but it honestly rarely is, especially when it comes to affairs. She put herself in this mess. Not only that, but affairs aside, it's important to have a contingency plan when it comes to finances. You really don't want to have to rely on someone else for your livelihood. Update. Eminent train wreck. The affair-born marriage. Long read. Interesting share on the progression of an affair-born marriage. Reference. Article written by Dr. Pittman. According to the stats provided, only 3 to 5% of affairs actually progress to marriage. While not part of the article, I would think that most of those are likely rushed into during limerence. The article also states 75% of second marriages fail. No mention of third marriages, which is likely higher. The odds of success of an affair-born marriage are just minuscule. My take, and this is not data-based, is that a very small percentage that are defined as successful are actually split. I believe there are successful miserable and successful happy. I think there are significant portions of people who are successful miserable because they trash so much and are so hard-headed. They make it work to save face and not admit that would be their biggest life's failure, so they choose living a crappy second marriage. I further submit that the little bitty tiny percent that are successful happy truly both had a toxic, dysfunctional, or abusive marriage they exited. Even then, happy is likely defined as better than the reason. See below article excerpt. Dr. Pittman's 9 defects in the dynamics of affairs that become marriages chart the trajectory of love as it arcs from a forbidden romance to an established marriage to a marital breakup. These 9 defects include, while still married to others, the affair partners become immersed in stimulating unreality, but the second marriage illuminates reality. Only after their marriage did the divorce become real enough to see that it was a horrible mistake. They were so caught up in infatuation that they never got around to figuring out if what they were doing was sane. The cheaters who wrecked the family or two and inflicted much pain on innocent people may feel no or little guilt during the affair, but become overwhelmed with guilt after they marry. Divorces drain both financially and emotionally. After affair partners marry, the new couple may feel a disparity in what had to be sacrificed to bring them together. Unfaithful couples who marry may believe that life after marriage will be as good as life during the affair, and that the greater the sacrifice, the greater the expectations for the new marriage. In short, the more people enjoy the battles involved in wrecking and escaping marriages, the less they are likely to enjoy the business as usual of the new marriage. The affair partners who were unfaithful develop a distrust of marriage and of the affair partner who is now a spouse. A marriage that begins on an untruth cannot have a trusting foundation. During the affair and the divorce, the unfaithful couple isolates and insulates themselves, and they retreat to a private little world protected from the devastation they have created, safe from anyone who tries to pull them apart. In this regime, memories or even mention of the betrayed spouse can be difficult. Later, the now married couple may long to reconnect with these people. However, everyone involved is hurt by the betrayal and not as forgiving as they had expected. They often find that they only have each other, and that can be very lonely. When the romance fades, as it does in most marriages, romantics do not understand that this is part of the growth of the marriage, and they do not know how to nurture a deeper, more meaningful relationship. Rather, they believe that they have just fallen out of love. During the affair and the divorce, the affair couple convinces each other that the defect of marriage is the fault of the betrayed spouse. To acknowledge otherwise now that the remarriage has taken place seems a betrayal of the rescue fantasies that fed the affair in the first place. The absence of a shared history that nurtures a comforting familiarity to relationships that begin early in life makes talking about the past difficult. An affair that wrecked the first marriage makes it painful and embarrassing for both spouses to discuss the past because it may promote jealousy and insecurity. Affair partners who marry do not want to hear the good qualities of the previous marriage and spouses, nor about any good times the former partners had. Trying to start over can be lonely and disheartening. All of this makes so much sense, and none more than a marriage that begins on an untruth cannot have a trusting foundation. How can something that is based on lies, dishonesty, and manipulation last? It is not meant to. Update, that moment, that look, that gift haven't posted in a while but thought I'd share something about my situation. The one gift my ex-wayward spouse left me that has helped me many times. A little background. Divorced 2.5 years after finding out about my wife's affair. I'm in constant contact with her as we co-parent. Amicable and no real emotions left for her. I've moved on and life is good now. Things have not been good for her, to put it mildly. Nothing major other than things here and there. Things I found out about and things that tend to concern me for my kids' sake. I'm a helper and fixer by nature. I guess that's why I stay connected to this sub. So when I find out something is going bad for her, my first instinct is to help. Of course I don't, but just saying. What I always reflect back on is this look she gave me during our final mediation session. Mind you, I was at an all-time low at this point in my life. This look is hard to describe. Her eyes just looked empty, unholy, evil, and at the same time, her mouth was clenched as if fighting off a smile. It was as if she was enjoying my pain. Man, that hurt. It's still very vivid in my mind. So when I get into these situations where I think about wanting to help, for that split second, my mind jumps back to that moment in the attorney's office. I do not feel vindicated or get joy out of her struggles, it's more a reassurance. I know I'm in the right place in my life, doing the right things. I often wonder if she did not give me that look, or was remorseful looking, or if her eyes were full of doubt how things may be different. So in that context, I value she gave me a lifetime gift. Am I crazy? Does anyone else have a similar point in time when they reflect to find reassurance and guidance? The deleted user said this. Yes, there is a video I found of my soon-to-be ex-husband fixing himself up for his other woman and smiling so proudly at himself. That smile was weird. It didn't look like him, and it is cruel given the context. You see, the video was recorded in our basement during our daughter's 6th birthday party with family. He hid in the basement most of that day because I already discovered his affair. When I asked him to come up and be present for blowing out candles and presents, he looked annoyed and angry the entire time he spent upstairs. He had a mean scowl on his face, only for him to go down into the basement and record himself proudly smiling for his other woman after fixing his collar and his hair. It's disgusting, really. I sometimes think back on that day when he looked so pleased with himself. The next day, he left for vacation with his other woman for 3 days. When he came back, he moved out to a studio apartment, no pets allowed. This was 2 weeks after I discovered his affair. He left me, our daughter, and 3 dogs behind. He also changed his phone number and stopped talking to our friends and his side of the family. Crazy, right? My daughter and I are still working through the trauma. I just think of that smile and I remember how dark his heart really is. Honestly, yeah, and it's like you said earlier, OP, or I suppose what Dr. Pittman said, only after their marriage did the divorce become real enough to see that it was a horrible mistake. They were so caught up in the infatuation that they never got around to figuring out if what they were doing was sane. Your ex really thought she was getting away with something. Now she's in a dumpster fire of her own doing. Update: good guys and gals always win. Have faith, the infidelity and affair is now just a tiny dot in the rearview mirror. Sure, the memories are haunting and, no question, the lowest point of my life. I will never forget being nauseated for days at a time. Confusion, stress never felt before, sleepless nights, suicidal thoughts, on and on. Thinking about the future was near impossible. Making it through each day was daunting. Been there, you are in the club no one wants to be in. It sucks. I'm now close to 3 years removed from that mess. Without a doubt, this life I have lived is nothing close to what I had dreamed. At the same time, by some miracle, I have landed on solid ground. My employer supported me through the tough times. I am forever grateful, and I'm now more dedicated than ever. My career and performance is excelling. Somehow I met the most amazing girlfriend. I never imagined having the connection I cherished with my ex-wife and never imagined building something remotely close after the damage caused by the affair. Miraculously, I achieved so much more. My values changed. This whole experience has changed how I view others and myself. I now know true friendship and foster that with a select few. I needed my kids and they needed me. My relationship with them has grown exponentially these past couple of years. They are in a good place, and that's all that kept me going. I am humbled. I do not know why or how I am so blessed. I know this, I'm not special, wealthy, or important. I just did my best to be a good person. Hang in there. Brighter days are ahead. My only advice to share is to be a good person and have confidence that the good guys always win. As I wrote, we are in a club where joining comes at a painful price, and if you need anything, reach out. You're not alone. Honestly, yeah, it's not hard to be a good person, and some people like your ex don't seem to understand that. You should be so proud of yourself, OP. You've come a long way. It's not easy to navigate divorce, but you came out on the other side on top. Update: answer to why people cheat, sharing a point of view. Everything we possess in life has value, whether it's material objects, friendships, relationships, careers, freedom, security, even ourselves. We all place value on what we have. How and what we value is complex. We are all unique, awash with life experiences, environments, DNA, you name it. Because of this, we all value differently, and how and what we value changes over time. Sometimes we can control the value of what we have, sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can make things more valuable. Sometimes, through neglect, we can make things less valuable. Sometimes the value is real and connected, sometimes it's perceived. Value is always relative, based on options and circumstances. We value in the present, and we value future potential. When it comes to cheating and affairs, the harsh reality is the wayward spouse valued the affair more than the marriage. It's that simple. Perhaps the wayward spouse made an error in perception, placed extreme value on the affair due to limerence and fantasy. Perhaps they didn't think and appreciate what they had in the marriage, and undervalued or misunderstood love. Maybe that's why there's regret. Maybe the value they placed was real. Maybe they didn't think about future value. When I reflect on my personal situation, I believe my ex took our relationship for granted. We never had problems, and I do believe she valued what we had. I also think she overvalued her affair partner and the high that the affair gave her. Update: well, fell off my bar stool last night, figuratively, of course. Catching up with a few friends, and ran into one of my ex's estranged friends. This woman was pretty lit and asked about ex, then proceeded to tell me what an F up my ex was. Okay, whatever. She then proceeded to volunteer how effed up that whole situation went down. Ears up, of course, I asked what she meant. She proceeded to unload a whole saga, none of which I knew. Evidently, my ex blew a huge chunk of the money she received during the divorce settlement by investing in a affair partner's business. I guess the business was very distressed, and the investment just bought time before it eventually went under. He then was going to move to another state and asked her to come. Evidently, she agreed. Then he reneged and dumped her. Guess he thought she wouldn't leave the kids. Nice to hear she was going to bail on her kids as well. Anyway, just when I thought I had a clear picture of everything, this pops up. Pretty sure this happened. I knew her spending habits weren't consistent with her income, and I knew she'd burn through the settlement, just happened too quick. This explains it. My girlfriend asked me if this upset me, hearing that she did that. The kids piece, yes. Everything else, her money, her choice. If anything, makes me not feel bad about her financial struggles. 49, male, divorced 3 years. The fact that she was willing to drop everything for some guy like this is disappointing, and it really goes to show where her priorities were. You maintained course and knew exactly what was important in life, aka your kids. Honestly, the fact that she even cheated on you in the first place means she was also disrespecting the kids. Her heart hasn't been in the right place for a long time. Update: why I never reconciled. Reconciliation was off the table for me. It wasn't that I didn't think about it. Of course, my kids, the financial impact, etc., were all factors. It all came down to accepting the reality of a new, different marriage or marital relationship. I arrived at my decision through my understanding of what a post-affair relationship would look like. I had to accept the following. First, she cost me and her the ability to have a pure marriage. Wasn't like we were married as virgins. It was about the purity of the marriage. I knew our relationship could potentially improve as a result of this, and things could even be better. She could be better. Counseling could help. Problem is, you just can't ever get it back. When it comes to purity, everything felt like it would be fake. Second, I would need to accept that my perspective of her would forever be changed. I knew we could restore the love, intimacy, and the connection, and she could potentially be a great partner. I don't know that I could ever view her as a wife again. It's simply a strange possessive feeling I had when it came to her that was gone. Like she was mine, and now she's not. Third, I had feared that while I may grow to love her again, there will always be something missing in that love. I imagined how I felt about her through reconciliation would be very similar to how a widower would feel after losing their spouse and remarrying. A widower may love their new partner through reconciliation, but not in the same way they loved their deceased spouse her before the affair. So when I processed this, I realized that I had one life to live. I wanted a pure marriage. I wanted a wife, and I wanted to give her all of me. I knew that was impossible by staying, not trying to sway anyone, just sharing my perspective that led to my decision. We're all different with different scenarios. Maybe this helps with your processing. If you stayed in the marriage, you'd never truly be married to just your ex-wife ever again. You'd be married to your ex and the guy she cheated on you with. Update: difference between affair sex and marriage sex. I have read a lot of posts on comparing affair sex and marriage sex. Wanted to share, in probably an oversimplistic way, the difference. Affair sex versus marriage sex. Newness versus closeness, dopamine versus oxytocin, exciting versus comforting, unsustainable versus sustainable. The best way I can describe this is comparing skydiving to holding a newborn. Affair sex is like skydiving the first time. It's new and exhilarating. Marriage sex is like holding your newborn child. It's the feeling of connection, comfort, and warmth. It's closeness. Like skydiving, after sex releases dopamine, it's a high from excitement. Now here's the catch. All you need to release dopamine is some positive excitement. It's easy. Like holding a newborn, marital sex releases oxytocin. It's a feeling of warmth and comfort. Oxytocin is a little more challenging. Oxytocin requires a feeling of security and safety to release. Our bodies naturally release oxytocin with a newborn because instinctually there are no safety alarms. Otherwise, humans fear everything. So with a mate, the safety alarms need to be shut down. This is done over time through connection and intimacy. Ideally, when we enter a new relationship, affair aside, the dopamine starts flowing. As the relationship progresses, the dopamine wanes. Now, hopefully, the relationship grows, and the dopamine is replaced through intimacy and closeness with oxytocin. Here's the really cool part. Our bodies actually crave the comfort generated by the oxytocin more than the dopamine. This is the case if the oxytocin is being released. Absent either is a feeling of emptiness. Now, when people feel this emptiness and need to feel alive, they chase the quick fix. Yep, dopamine. What most who have had experience with sex and relationships understand is that the excitement of affair or one-night stand sex wanes as well. Whether it's with one-night partners or multiple partners over time, the dopamine releases subside. This is simply science and our bodies. So, like the skydiving example, the fifth or sixth time is far less exhilarating than the first. Oxytocin, on the other hand, is sustainable, and releases actually increase over time. So just like the newborn. Example, over time, the bond and closeness increases. Thought I'd share this to help those betrayed spouses who are trying to process, regardless of the outcome of their relationship. Hopefully, you can see how this plays into many common themes on this sub. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Was affair sex better? Or, I can't be intimate, etc. If not, let's dialogue. Anyway, hope this was worth a quick read. This is really an interesting and profound perspective, OP. It makes a whole lot of sense. Affairs are definitely all about the quick fix. I think people honestly really get bored of the normality of their day-to-day life. It's unfortunate that for some reason their head is telling them they need chaos and excitement that an affair supposedly brings. I've said it before, but people should just want to be able to spice things up in their own marriage, in whatever way that might be, instead of chasing a fantasy. Update: prevalence of the modern walkaway wife. This is a cut through the BS post about walkaway wife syndrome. There's a harsh reality to this, and it needs to surface. That's simple. All starts with boredom, period. In many cases, these women have everything. One could even argue too much. There's nothing wrong with being bored. It's how they address the boredom. Instead of finding purpose, activities, friends, etc., modern women retreat to social media and fantasies. The combination leads to painting a picture in their heads of some idealistic life. Social media is wrought with damaged divorcees that perpetuate single, strong female fantasies. These damaged women ruin their lives, can't accept responsibility, and refuse to admit they are miserable. They post content, get likes, and feel justified. It's like recruiting into a cult. They feed off of each other. Trust me, if your wife is bored, she's consuming all this stuff. She's envisioning a fantasy which does not include you or marriage. Rationalizing is irrational. These walkaway wives are now in a mental tug-of-war. They have good lives. They are bored, but now they have this fantasy that excites them. Rather than taking accountability and addressing the boredom, they cling to the fantasy. They convince themselves the marriage is the problem. They create a narrative that their marriage is not good. Naturally, this means it's the husband. They start inventorying everything bad about you and the marriage. Then they connect the thoughts through toxic social media, i.e., TikTok babe had the same issues as me, left, and now is fulfilled. Once they inventory all the bad about their marriage, they start confiding in friends, relatives, Reddit, etc. They paint an overly biased portrayal of everything. Words flung around, abuse, narcissist, controlling, etc. Pity party ensues. Divorce chants from the bleachers. It finally culminates into the bomb drop out of the blue. It strikes. Edit. Take notice. The word unhappy never surfaced in the post. That is a ruse. Trust me, if they were unhappy, you'd see it and feel it. Boredom is what differentiates a walkaway wife. Yes. Like I said, I couldn't agree more. There's nothing wrong with being bored. I think it's actually a sign of a healthy relationship. People are constantly growing and changing. You're never the same person you were yesterday. And what's more exciting than constantly learning who the person you're married to is and growing together? What do you make of Ope's saga?
Story 3.
The front entrance to our home is seldom used. We usually enter through the side door to the garage or the sliding glass doors leading to the patio. To the right of the entryway stands the formal living room, meticulously maintained, but the least frequented room in the house. On the left, at the end of the entry, lies a hallway connecting to 3 bedrooms, including our spacious master suite and a guest bathroom. The formal living room, enveloped in darkness due to closed massive curtains, features a white camelback couch against the back wall, with large wingback chairs on either side, all facing a walnut coffee table. Although insignificant until that day, late that morning, I found myself in a wingback chair, facing away from the archway between the entry and the living room. In that chair, I have often contemplated my life and assessed potential losses during Lynn's absence. The prospect of ending our troubled marriage brings concerns about our shared friends deciding their allegiances, the loss of our house, potential alimony payments for years, and the sudden disappearance of half my net worth alongside legal expenses. Despite these considerations, dealing with Lynn, whom I describe as vindictive, remains an inevitable challenge. Amid my reflections, the side door opens, signaling Lynn's return from grocery shopping. I realize I should have pretended to be in our bedroom to avoid another argument if caught in the living room. Arguments are commonplace, initiated by Lynn's unwarranted criticism for minor infractions, fabricated reasons, or no reason at all. I understand it as a tactic to keep me off balance. Lynn can prolong arguments for weeks over trivial matters, and I always find a way to placate her, believing it better to end disputes promptly. I deem life unbearable with constant friction and aim to settle fights as soon as possible, though the challenge lies in the short time until the next one. After 10 years of marriage, I see no solution other than pass away or divorce. Nonetheless, I persistently try to improve the situation, primarily for my sanity, rather than to make things more pleasant for Lynn. I hear the freezer door shut, realizing she has put away the frozen food. Anticipating her request for me to get the remaining groceries, I brace myself for her orders and criticism. To avoid her for as long as possible, I remain motionless, waiting for her call or whistle. The whistle, resembling that of a dog, has become nearly unbearable. Instead of her voice, I hear light footsteps as she approaches the entryway. If I had looked, I would have seen her stop at the tiled entry floor, peering down the hallway to ensure she is alone. Quietly waiting, Lynn contemplates calling me in the car before getting home but feels safe, assuming I am diligently working on the gazebo in the backyard. Within seconds, I hear her cell phone chirp as she dials a number. Now in the entry, just 5 feet away from the back of the chair where I sit, Lynn speaks to her father about plans for Thursday afternoon. She mentions calling him at work after 1 o'clock and the logistics of their meeting. Still unnoticed, I listen as Lynn discusses details with her father, concluding with a light-hearted farewell. I heard the flip phone close, and her footsteps retreated across the carpet towards the sliding glass door. Whistling and calling out to the gazebo project he had been working on in the backyard, she seemed oblivious to my labored breathing and the pounding of blood in my heart and head. Tense situations were not new to me, and I relied on automatic responses honed from my experiences in the Army and elsewhere. In such moments, the first rule was not to panic unless actively under attack. Utilize knowledge to one's advantage, choose the right time to engage, maintain a blank face, control breathing, and appear normal. I stood and entered the den, stating, "I'm here. I was in the bathroom. I've got to run to the hardware store and get parts for the gazebo," crossing through the din toward the kitchen and the side door while avoiding eye contact with her. Marveling at my ability to articulate those words and my restraint from reacting violently, I walked by, and she gave me a look, noticing the redness in my face. Advising me to wear a hat, she expressed concern about potential sunburn. She mentioned not wanting to see my skin peeling off in a couple of days. Additionally, she informed me about groceries that needed to be brought in before going anywhere and emphasized not being gone all day. After dropping her phone into her purse on the kitchen counter, Lynn went out to inspect my work on the gazebo, leaving criticisms for my return. Lynn's communication style was typical, mostly involving instructions and implied or explicit criticism. As she entered the backyard, I retrieved her phone, checked the last dialed number, memorized it, and returned the phone to her purse. After putting away the groceries, I left in my small pickup truck but didn't head for the hardware store. I stopped at a local park a couple of blocks away. For the first 15 minutes, I replayed the short conversation in my mind, wanting to ensure I had every word memorized to make notes. There was no doubt about its meaning. My wife was having an affair, likely in our house, maybe even in our bed while I was at work. Furious, I felt I was subsidizing her infidelity by working to support her. Who was the man she called Daddy? It wasn't her real father. The area code was local, and her parents lived 1,000 miles away in California. In the early days of our marriage, she sometimes called me Daddy during lovemaking moments, though she had stopped doing so. I had thought she might be signaling a desire for kids, but we decided not to have children a couple of years into the marriage. She was undeniably a daddy's girl. Considering practical matters, I pondered my best course of action. Her lover would enter through the back gate on Thursday, likely walking down the alley. I contemplated ambushing him there, but wondered about dealing with my cheating wife if the lover was on foot. His car had to be nearby. It struck me. The lover would probably leave his car at the park. Determining who this person was became crucial. The obvious approach was to call the number from her cell phone. Having someone else make the call, as if by mistake, seemed plausible, with a woman being the most likely to get information. Who could make that call? Who else might know about this? The answer was clear. Lynn's best friend was Sue. If Sue didn't know, I doubted anyone else did. Lynn's sister was unlikely to have information, since they had not been close since the sister's messy divorce and subsequent estrangement from the family. Could I ask Sue? I had known her as long as Lynn had, and Sue had always been my friend too. However, Women could be more loyal to each other than to their spouses. Sue was married to Nick, who was 15 years her senior, and they seemed to be the most loving couple in the world. I figured that Sue would tell Nick almost anything. Would she disclose information about Lynn, though? Did I consider Nick a friend? We weren't close friends, but Nick was an upstanding guy, and I would have thought Nick would have told me if he'd known about something like this. I decided to try Nick. That meant a drive to the golf course, where Nick, semi-retired, donated time on Saturdays as a goodwill ambassador for the course in exchange for a free round of golf during the week when the course was not full. On the way over, I planned my approach very carefully. I couldn't just blurt it out. What if the news got back to Sue and then to Lynn? I had to be cagey. Riding in a golf cart with Nick as he checked on conditions at the 7th hole, I brought up a hypothetical question. I inquired about his approach to confidential conversations, asking whether he would feel obligated to keep it confidential or if he would share it with Sue. Nick gave me an odd glance and continued driving for several yards. I clarified, asking if he and Sue always shared what they heard from other people, even if it was shared in confidence. It was just a hypothetical scenario. Nick pulled over onto the grass, turning to look directly at me with an almost expectant expression. In response to my inquiry, he said, "Do you have a specific question for me? If you do, ask away," maintaining the same strange and intense look on his face. I asked Nick if he could keep our conversation confidential if I were to pose a question. I made a promise that I wouldn't mention it unsolicited, but if Sue were to inquire, I wouldn't lie to her. That was my operating principle. I assured him that I could keep a secret, but I wouldn't deceive my friend, wife. It was evident that Nick knew something, and I sensed that he wanted to share it with me. After composing myself, I directly asked him if he knew anything about a possible affair my wife might be having. I rephrased to make it clearer, asking if he had any knowledge of an affair Lynn was currently having or had in the past. Nick's response flowed out like a dam bursting. He recounted an incident from last New Year's at the Holden's party. Everyone was outside, preparing for the fireworks display, when Sue fell ill from the champagne. Despite her infrequent drinking habits, she went upstairs to the bathroom. On the landing, she heard someone attempting the doorknob while she was getting sick in the toilet. When she washed up and left the bathroom, she heard noises coming from down the hall where it turns towards some bedrooms. She was afraid that someone else might be ill, and she walked down there and looked. Lynn was up against the wall at the end of the hallway, and some big dude was, well, there's no good way to say it. He had her against the wall with her legs wrapped around his waist. Lynn saw Sue standing there, and she smiled and did a little wave off, like, "Get the hell out of here." On the way home, she shared the details with Nick. Sue and Lynn, being long-standing friends, needed to discuss matters before taking any action. I suggested immediate disclosure to you. Ultimately, Sue had a conversation with your wife, who conveyed that the incident with Buddy White was a one-time occurrence fueled by drinks, a disagreement with you, and aggressive advances from Buddy, a known bully who married into wealth. Sue, aware of Buddy's reputation, requested that I keep it under wraps, not wanting to jeopardize your marriage over a singular event. However, I made it clear to Sue that if you ever directly inquired about it, I wouldn't lie. The burden of this secret has weighed heavily on me for the past 5 months. I'm relieved it's out in the open, but I'm deeply sorry for what you're going through, man. Unfortunately, it's not over. Sue deceived her. Lynn has been involved with Buddy, or perhaps someone else by now. I overheard her talking to him on the phone just an hour ago. Let's head back to my place and discuss what Sue has to say. We left the golf course in separate vehicles and headed to Sue and Nick's place. He conveyed the news to his wife, and she sat down in tears. She had harbored high hopes for my and Lynn's relationship, willing to offer any support she could. However, upon learning that the affair was ongoing, her demeanor shifted. Sue experienced a sense of betrayal similar to what Lynn had caused. Up until now, she had believed the assurance that the affair had ended and had based her actions, or rather inaction, on that falsehood. "Sue, there's something you could do for me. I examined Lynn's phone, and I have the number she called. Would you mind giving him a call, pretend it's a wrong number, and try to obtain his name? I want to confirm who she's involved with now." Sue, an editor working remotely, held a PhD in English Lit and possessed a theater background. Devising the call with her finest acting and social engineering skills, She opted for her faultless English accent, consistently leaving a lasting impression. Dialing with the phone on speaker, she heard, "Hi, this is Buddy White." Sue blinked. "Sorry, wrong number." "Well, that was surely unsatisfying," she commented, her entire scenario unraveling. Yet, the revelation was clear. Lynn hadn't terminated the affair with White, adding another piece of crucial data. Discussing our next steps, I insisted on catching the duo during their upcoming Thursday encounter, aiming for extensive ammunition. I wanted to confront my wife armed with abundant facts, catching her in flagrante delicto and exposing the lies she'd inevitably use to conceal the situation. Expressing reluctance to hire a detective due to costs and uncertainty about Lynn's interactions before Thursday, I sought a swift means to gather evidence. They fell into a contemplative silence for a minute or more. Sue suggested the idea of a mole. She proposed the notion of having someone, like Lynn's best friend, extract the truth from her. I was skeptical, but Sue insisted, saying, "Never underestimate an angry woman. I've had enough of her and how she's treated us all. I believe I can craft a story that will compel her to divulge everything." Over the next hour, we devised a plan. Sue urgently calling Lynn, claiming a desperate need for help, and arranging a Sunday morning coffee meeting. Nick would modify Sue's old purse to hold a video camera, recording every word and facial expression. By noon on Sunday, they anticipated having substantial information. Sue promptly contacted Lynn, referencing a situation akin to the New Year's party. Lynn agreed to the meeting, secretly pleased with her friend's newfound assertiveness. Sue arrived early at the coffee shop, choosing a table under an awning, arranging her purse with the concealed camera. Ensuring the optimal angle and conducting audio tests, she positioned chairs strategically. The air was calm, eliminating wind noise possibilities. She set it up for one-button recording, the 16-gigabyte card offering ample storage. Nick had ingeniously secured the camera and purse with Velcro straps, disguising lens and mic holes within the purse's pattern. Sue was prepared as Lynn arrived. Sue asked Lynn to grab coffee, mentioning that she would save their spot in the most secluded area. Sue pressed the button when Lynn returned with the drinks, swiftly confirming the recording. They quickly covered the basics, and Sue began her tale. Sue expressed her dilemma to Lynn, mentioning that there's this guy who's interested in her. She didn't know what to do, describing him as attractive, especially since it had been ages since she and Nick were lovemaking. Sue shared that Nick completely trusts her, and that she's never cheated on him. However, she admitted feeling tempted now, and sought Lynn's advice. Sue wanted to understand how Lynn felt after the New Year's party, and asked if she would regret going through with it. Lynn responded by encouraging Sue, saying, "Go for it, girl. Honestly, I can't fathom why you haven't done this sooner. Nick's nice and all, but, honey, he's past his prime. You're still young and cute. I've always admired your appearance, but I've never understood why you waste your time with Nick." Sue was surprised by Lynn's lack of remorse and asked if the New Year's party was genuinely a one-time thing. Lynn explained, "Honey, I won't lie to you. I had to tell you that at the time, or you might have spilled the beans. But now that you're in a similar situation, we can share all this. In fact, we'll be having some real steamy discussions. Lynn, spill everything. I'm so into this now that I'm thinking of doing it myself. How did it start with you and Buddy? Are you still at it? You should see the look in your eyes. If you're not excited now, I bet you will be in a few minutes." Lynn proceeded to share details about her encounter with Buddy at Holden's Halloween party. She described how they met 2 months before, with Buddy eyeing her at the party. Lynn explained that they discreetly met on the landing and ended up in the bathroom. She recounted the passionate encounter, emphasizing Buddy's qualities. Lynn affirmed that she was still with him and would be meeting him next week in her own bed. Sue inquired about me, expressing concern about any feelings of guilt. Lynn dismissed any guilt, stating, "Sue, Paul's a husband. You can't treat a husband like a lover. They serve different roles. Paul is there to do what I want. Buddy is there for good closeness." Lynn explained her strategy with me, treating me like a good provider who follows orders. She mentioned using diversionary tactics like checking for perfume to make me believe she'd never cheat. Lynn likened having me around to having a little gay friend, describing him as docile and someone she could control. She highlighted the freedom she enjoyed, knowing mine's whereabouts and never worrying about me catching her with a lover. Sue asked Susie if she had other lovers, and Susie replied that she couldn't count them all. The first one was in their first year of marriage, picked up in a supermarket. He never knew her real name, and they bounced around hotel rooms for 6 months until he got too clingy. Susie mentioned the need to watch out with young guys. After that, there were a series of one-offs, including a salesman friend into kinky stuff, which worked well as he only came to town a few times a year. Susie stated that she had kept Buddy busy for longer than almost any of them, describing him as a hound with a hole-splitting tool. Susie shared details about Buddy being married to a clueless woman, working while he played around. She mentioned being in control of when he could visit her. Then, Susie asked Lynn about her new conquest, and Sue ran through her prepared story about her fictional lover, Rod. The details weren't important, but Lynn believed every word, encouraging her to take full advantage. Sue expressed amazement at Lynn's control and doubted if she could treat Nick the way Lynn treated me. Lynn explained the dynamic in the animal kingdom, comparing dominant individuals to the rest of the pack. Lynn asserted her alpha position with me and encouraged Sue to take on a similar role with Nick, assuring her that freedom would be hers. Lynn suggested starting with Rod and enjoying every second, stating that Nick would still be there and would fit into his natural submissive role. Lynn addressed concerns about STDs and asked if Sue used contraceptives. Sue explained that most of the time, she made the guy use a contraceptive, but with Buddy, it was different due to his aggressiveness. Sue mentioned getting scared once because it hurt to pee, but the doc said it was irritation from rough closeness. There was a time when she got infected with gonorrhea, and after that, she was more careful. Sue asked how she kept that from me, and Lynn described allowing me to go out by mentioning his interest in playing the guitar with his pals. She looked at me deadpan and gave me the choice, leading to a confrontation later when she took antibiotics. Sue, eager to get the recording back to Nick and me, thanked Lynn and left for home. The conspirators watched the video, appalled. Sue and Nick could hardly recognize Lynn because she was never so harsh on me when others were around. I was shocked, though not as much as the couple, having come to know that Lynn was capable of almost anything. Sue brought up Anita White and mentioned her concerns about Anita's knowledge of her husband's infidelity. She expressed the dilemma of whether to inform Anita about Buddy being with Lynn, considering the risk of Anita blowing the cover. Sue described Anita as seeming deeply unhappy with her husband's reputation as a bully, and pondered if Anita might be entirely cowed by him. Sue suggested that talking to Anita might affect her plans, and sought help from Lynn in handling the situation. Sue thanked us for our assistance and assured that we would be kept out of further details. She specifically asked me not to do anything stupid. In response, I acknowledged the mistakes I had made over the past 10 years, but clarified that I didn't intend anything violent. I assured them that I would handle the situation in my way and requested strict confidentiality. I asked everyone to avoid answering if Anita called, taking full responsibility. Later that evening, Sue phoned Anita White and introduced herself. She confirmed they had talked at Holden's parties and asked if Anita could talk freely. Sue then broached the subject, revealing that Buddy was cheating on Anita with someone Sue knew. She expressed regret and conveyed Anita's right to know. Silence followed on the other end, with Sue discerning sniffles and sobs. Anita shared her frustration, mentioning past issues that Buddy claimed were resolved a year ago. She had taken him back based on his promise, with a clear warning of ending the relationship if he repeated his mistakes. Sue offered comfort and assistance, expressing a willingness to help based on Anita's decision. Anita, appreciating the concern, outlined her resolution. She emphasized that her partner would never share her bed again, detailing the terms of a stringent prenuptial agreement that would leave him penniless in case of divorce due to proven infidelity. She described him as unfit for employment, good only for accompanying her to events and engaging in extramarital affairs. She affirmed her determination to ensure he faced the consequences. In response to my offer to gather evidence, Anita committed to maintaining composure for a few days until she had the evidence in her hands. Plans were made for someone to collect preliminary evidence from my office the next day. Sue arranged a meeting, contacting me at work to schedule an appointment in her office on Monday at 1 p.m. Entering Sue's office with a video camera, I introduced myself to Mrs. White, the wife of the man involved with my wife. I placed the camera on her desk, cued the relevant section, and played the recording. Despite the faint screen visibility, the audio quality was excellent. Witnessing Mrs. White's tears, I offered a comforting gesture, acknowledging her familiarity with her husband's behavior over time. Subsequently, I revealed my plans to Anita, stating that participation was optional, but extending the offer nonetheless. Anita disclosed the years of intimidation she had endured, expressing her desire to turn the tables and make her husband suffer. When asked about potential violence, I acknowledged that things might get messy, but assured her I had no intention of causing damage. Following the meeting with Anita, work became an unwelcome distraction. Lingering effects of Lynn's words in the video affected me deeply. While acknowledging some truth in her remarks, I defended my conciliatory nature, understanding her perception of me as a wimp. Despite the hurt, I contemplated showcasing a different side of myself on Thursday, pondering how Lynn would react to a more assertive approach. I dismissed any idea of reconciliation, recognizing the irreparable loss of trust in our relationship. Tuesday and Wednesday were marked by reduced office productivity as I meticulously reviewed potential scenarios. The complexity of variables reminded me of the fragility of well-laid plans. Multiple potential outcomes, including my preferred approach, were considered. Thursday's events would necessitate improvisation, and I dedicated time to refining my physical abilities in anticipation. At home, tensions prevailed, limiting conversations to necessities. Lynn, typically assertive, observed my recent behavior, aiming to understand the issue and regain control. Ironically, she found herself anticipating Thursday, speculating on the potential insights a passionate encounter with Buddy might provide. On Tuesday night, as Lynn showered, I searched my dresser drawers for a childhood keepsake from my grandfather. Both my father and grandfather had military backgrounds. Grandpa, after Normandy, he acquired a set of steel knuckles from a German soldier as a war souvenir. As I examined the menacing steel equipment, I recalled Grandpa's caution about its use, but acknowledgement that it might be handy someday. That day had nearly arrived. It was a form of war. Lynn and her lover had engaged in unfair play, prompting me to force a hearty breakfast on Thursday. I knew I wouldn't eat lunch, but hoped to slow down my rival. Pacing in my office, I deposited items in the guest bedroom, contingent on Lynn's choice of waiting in the backyard or returning inside after opening the gate. Regardless, I could adapt. Manipulate the set of knuckles on my desk. I paced, stoking my controlled anger. By 1 o'clock, I changed into jeans, a t-shirt, and sturdy running shoes. Checking my pockets, cell phone, keys, knuckles, and wallet, I called Lynn from my desk phone to preempt her call. The conversation was calm and non-threatening, explaining meetings and phone unavailability, anticipating a possible delay in returning home. Lynn interpreted my call as a sign of returning docility, relaxing with this knowledge. Perhaps she'd reward me with cool-down makeup closeness. That evening, she prepared to meet her lover, and the two drove to the park in 20 minutes. Loverboy's car was absent, so Anita dropped him off, and he jogged to his house, slipping into the backyard through the side gate. Positioned behind a photinia bush on the house's end, away from the garage, I waited, nervously checking the muted phone's time. At 1:45, Lynn emerged in the backyard, dressed in a string bikini, heading to the back gate. After unlocking it and surveying the alley, she closed the gate and settled into a lounge chair under the pecan tree. This signaled me. I had left the side gate ajar. I slipped back through the opening, circled to the front door, and using my key, opened it. Walking over the spot where my wife's betrayal had been exposed days earlier, I entered. In the spare room, I grabbed a cordless drill and some hardware, entering the master bedroom. In less than a minute, I installed a hasp on the inside of the door, leaving a lock hanging. Placing a small piece of wood between the door edge and the jamb, I ensured it wouldn't close, just in case my wife attempted to shut it. Heart pounding, I took the drill to the guest room, picked up the video camera, adorned my right hand with brass knuckles, and waited. Many things could have gone wrong. I might have forgotten a step. Lynn could have unlocked the gate earlier, or her lover could have arrived prematurely. Fortunately, none of that occurred. With controlled breath, I awaited the final assault, planned and executed on my terms. Standing, Brass knuckles on my right hand, I held the video camera, peering through the slightly open guest bedroom door. The dark hallway might impact video quality, but the audio would be crucial. As the sliding glass door moved and voices emerged, Lynn's laughter mingled with a male growl. Imagining the man's hands on her, I glimpsed my wife, bikini top already discarded, entering the master bedroom with her lover, neglecting to close the door. I followed at a distance, still recording. Kneeling at the door, I observed Buddy embracing Lynn, who closed her eyes and unbuttoned his shirt. Carefully, I set the video camera on the dresser inside the door, capturing the unfolding scene on the bed. This waiting was the most challenging, a desire to record the undeniable act, leaving no room for denial, fueled by my suppressed rage. Retreating from the door, I stood prepared. Limiting peeks to avoid detection, I observed the couple caressing, both now undressed. With an entire afternoon ahead, they took their time, surrendering to passion. Outside the door, I overheard Lynn referring to Buddy as Daddy, confirming my suspicions about her daddy issues. Anticipating retribution, I couldn't wait to confront them. I heard Buddy's voice expressing eagerness. Peeking again, I saw the man between Lynn's legs, then witnessed the plunge and heard her scream in an unprecedented manner. They began moving together, uttering curses and unintelligible sounds. Having seen enough, I touched the brass knuckles for luck and silently approached the bed. Lynn noticed me just before I forcefully shoved Buddy in the ribs, ejecting him from her. Screaming, he accused Buddy of violating my wife. Shocked, Buddy's face transformed, and he reverted to his bullying demeanor, moving to deal with me. I withdrew a few steps as Buddy turned the far corner of the bed, heading toward him. Misinterpreting my move as a retreat, Lynn, now on her knees, clutched the covers, yelling for me to get out and not hurt Buddy. I shifted back on my trailing foot, took a running step, and hurled myself into Buddy's chest, delivering the brass knuckles forcefully to the solar plexus. They crashed to the floor, with my full weight compressing his chest. In situations where breathing is compromised, all other considerations become irrelevant. Buddy pushed, attempting to dislodge me, emitting a high-pitched whining noise, struggling for breath. Panic filled his eyes. Sitting up and straddling my opponent, I observed Buddy's hands pressing on the floor, trying to find a better position to breathe. I then administered the coup de grace, raising my right hand high and bringing the steel on my fist down directly onto the center of Buddy's terrified face with considerable force. With nowhere for his head to recoil and mitigate the blow, I heard bones satisfyingly crunch and witnessed blood pouring from Buddy's ruined face. Hindered by blood flowing into his mouth and throat, Buddy was completely incapacitated. I got up, walking toward the door, content with the initial confrontation. Ignoring Lynn's screams until her plea for help reached me, I realized she thought I was leaving, aligning with the plan for psychological warfare. After kicking the small wood piece away from the jamb, I closed the door and locked the hasp in place. Turning to face Lynn, I observed her expression shift from anger to frantic realization that we were all locked in. She was undressed and had no protection from this unpredictable version of her husband. In response, she altered her tone, pleading with me. Paul, I know it looks bad, but he forced me into this. He's a bully. He threatened to hurt me and you too. He said he would destroy you to have me. I had to do it. I didn't want to. Approaching the bed slowly as she delivered her explanations, I maintained a stoic expression. Dismissing her with a stern command, I stated, "Shut up! You're lying. I know you've been involved with him for months." Redirecting my attention to the wounded person on the floor, who was gurgling and showing signs of distress, I made it clear that I wanted Buddy hurt, not dead. Carefully positioning him close to the iron bedstead, I placed him on his side for blood drainage. Retrieving 5 pairs of handcuffs from the top dresser drawer, I proceeded to secure Buddy's ankles and wrists to the bedstead with 4 of them. Returning to my prone wife, I maneuvered her legs off the bed, secured her hands behind her back, and guided her into the bathroom, seating her on the toilet. I conveyed a stern message, urging her not to cause any damage and insisting that it was time for her to confess. While speaking, I emphasized the presence of brass knuckles on my right fist, ensuring she noticed them. I demanded the complete narrative, how she met the other person, the reasons behind her actions, and why she thought it acceptable to betray me. Additionally, I sought details about her involvement with other men over the past decade, making it clear that we had ample time to unravel the story throughout the afternoon. Lynn made a calculated decision, considering that I wouldn't be spending time with her lover. I knew some details about her actions, but the extent of my knowledge remained uncertain. Questions lingered in my mind. Could she manipulate certain aspects to make her infidelity sound less treacherous? Was she daring enough to lie? Lynn expressed her reluctance, sharing that she never intended for the situation to unfold as it did. She described the aggressiveness of an imposing individual who approached her at a party hosted by the Holtons, ultimately luring her upstairs. Unaware of the person's intentions, Lynn found herself in a vulnerable position with no one around to assist. Curious about the details, I inquired, "What party was that?" Sue, having witnessed the incident, could provide additional information, confirming that I had been cornered. In my quest for more information, Lynn speculated that Sue or Nick might have exposed her. She insisted that Sue had witnessed only the New Year's party, but I countered, reminding her that it was Halloween when she had been with the other person over 20 times. Determined to uncover the truth, I questioned her about who might have revealed her secret. With a sense of defiance, Lynn responded, "You'd be surprised. How many people do you think Loverboy has told? Maybe it was one of them, but that doesn't matter. Sue told you this? That person. I'll claw her eyes out. But I know something about her that will wreck her marriage, and I'll sure as hell use it." After Lynn shared details about Sue's fabricated lover, Rod, she claimed credit for inventing him for my benefit. She described how they orchestrated conversations to extract information, with Sue recording the entire exchange and storing it on multiple DVDs to be sent out at her discretion. Lynn clarified that Sue hadn't initially informed her of the situation, and no specific details were provided by Sue. Regarding the revelation about the New Year's party, I pointed out that I learned about her extensive history during a video conversation. I recalled a phone call Lynn made to her lover last Saturday in our entryway, where she openly expressed affection for him, inadvertently disclosing everything about her past. Convinced that I had sufficient information, I informed her that any further communication should be directed to my lawyer, and legal papers would be served in a couple of days. Expressing the need to consult with an attorney about our situation, I pulled out my cell phone and called Anita to handle the situation. After a brief conversation, I chuckled and ended the call. Marching Lynn back into the bedroom, I showed her the sorry state of her lover, undressed, handcuffed, wheezing, and covered in blood, almost causing her to vomit. I deposited her on the bed, turned off the video camera, unlocked the bedroom door, and opened it for Anita, who had been waiting outside in her car. Addressing Anita, I remarked, "Well, Anita, I saved you some of him. His face is not much to look at now, though. Here's his latest lover, my soon-to-be former wife, Lynn. Have anything to say to her?" Anita approached Lynn sitting on the bed and slapped her hard across the left cheek, evening out the red marks on her face. Expressing frustration, Anita berated Lynn for her foolishness and revealed how highly she regarded the man lying on the floor. Turning to me, Anita pondered, "What are we going to do with him now, Anita? I'm inclined to toss this one out the door with no clothes on and see how long it takes her to find another companion." Get it? Companion. I expressed relief that she had preserved his tool for me. I mentioned having a razor-sharp new hunting knife and suggested cutting off his tool to present it to Lynn, who seemed to adore it. Additionally, I considered stashing his balls in the vault for the safety of women in the town. I intended to enforce my prenup, putting his balls in a vice, as he would get nothing if caught cheating. We planned to escort him to the hospital, providing a fabricated story about finding him injured in the garage. This would ensure his cooperation, knowing he could be cut off without a dime. Perhaps I'd throw him a few crumbs. Regarding Lynn, I mentioned her attachment to her father and pondered if there was more to their story during her upbringing, though lacking any proof. In the event of a messy divorce, I noted that her father might disinherit her, as he did with her sister, to protect his reputation and substantial inheritance. Even after the divorce, I would retain intriguing videos to share if necessary, keeping her in check. I decided to let her get dressed, take her car, and find a place to reflect, cautioning that her ATM and credit cards wouldn't work. I provided her with a quarter, sarcastically remarking it was for a two-bit fancy woman. Maintaining a distant friendship with Anita, we sometimes reached out to each other when feeling low, both hesitant to dive into another relationship after being burned. I acknowledged the pain caused by my harsh treatment of Lynn during the ordeal, recognizing it wasn't the real me. Despite likening it to war, where cruelty can emerge, I vowed never to be in that position again. However, I had no regrets about marring Buddy's face. Anita's insurance covered basic repairs to Buddy's face, and she cut him loose with a little more money than the prenup required. His attempts to attract women proved challenging. In the ensuing months, my depression deepened, and I faded from sight. Lynn accepted a fair settlement and moved in with her sister, seeking help. She grappled with the severe miscalculation of her actions, feeling sick when watching nature shows about animal of prey. Terms like alpha dog or pecking order triggered discomfort, and nightmares about that night with Buddy and me occasionally haunted her. Despite occasional feelings of missing me, I harbored no such sentiments towards her.
Story 4.
The sun was setting over the horizon, casting orange and red hues over a small garage far from the tourist-packed beaches. The air was thick with motor oil, burnt rubber, and a trace of ocean salt. Ricardo, a wiry and broad-shouldered from years of labor, leaned over a worn Volkswagen Beetle. Focused and skilled, he had earned a reputation in his neighborhood for rebuilding engines to perfection. Quiet and hard-working, Ricardo dreamed of owning a garage, a small home, and a yard for kids to play. For now, his work was his passion and purpose. Little did he know how deeply something as fleeting as a kiss could affect him, or how quickly love intertwined with betrayal could sow the seeds of something far more complex. But for now, Ricardo was just a young man with humble dreams and extraordinary talent. Ricardo's favorite car was a sleek black 1968 Chevrolet Impala, a powerhouse that stood out among the worn-down sedans and compact cars that typically rolled into the garage. The Impala belonged to Antonio, a grizzled, middle-aged man with a face etched by years of exposure to the harsh Mexican sun. Antonio never revealed the car's true owner, and Ricardo never asked. It didn't matter. To Ricardo, the Impala was a masterpiece, and he treated it with reverence each time it appeared. The car's elegant contours and polished chrome trim reflected the light like a mirror, commanding attention in the dimly lit garage. Its presence seemed to dominate the space, casting long shadows under the flickering fluorescent lights. On those nights, Ricardo often stayed late. Once everyone else had gone, he would take a rag and meticulously polish the steering wheel and dashboard until they gleamed. When he was certain he was alone, Ricardo would slide into the driver's seat. With one hand gripping the oversized steering wheel and the other draped casually over the door, he'd imagine himself as one of the wealthy men he'd seen in American movies, confident and at ease behind the wheel of such a magnificent machine. Occasionally, he'd imagine a cigar nestled between his fingers, watching invisible smoke spiral lazily into the air. He would grin, closing his eyes briefly to envision himself driving down the coastal highway in the Impala, the wind tugging at his hair, and the rhythmic crash of waves in the background. Yet, these fantasies always concluded the same way, with Ricardo stepping out of the car, locking it meticulously, and returning to his everyday life. The Impala wasn't his, but that didn't stop him from cherishing it or treating it like a prized possession. 7 months later, Ricardo arrived home one evening to find his mother radiating joy. She had arranged for him to marry Luciana, a reserved but undeniably beautiful woman from a nearby town. "Ricardo, I have the best news!" his mother exclaimed. "Luciana has agreed to be your wife. Her family is thrilled, and I just know you'll make her happy." Ricardo, ever respectful and dutiful, didn't object. Truthfully, he was content with the prospect. The idea of building a life with Luciana, someone warm and kind, gave him a sense of direction beyond his devotion to cars and tools. Their wedding was an intimate celebration, filled with family, marigolds fragrance, and bursts of laughter. Ricardo wore a crisp white shirt, his hair carefully combed, while Luciana shone in a simple yet graceful dress. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was more than enough. Married life proved to be exactly what Ricardo had hoped for. He woke early, worked long hours at the garage, and returned each evening to Luciana's radiant smile and the comforting aroma of home-cooked meals. Their modest home brimmed with love, even if it lacked extravagance. Ricardo cherished sitting at the table, listening to Luciana recount her day, her laughter ringing like a melody. Though his work was exhausting and physically demanding, His nights were filled with her tenderness and unwavering attention. 5 years into their marriage, Ricardo Moreno's lifelong dream became reality. The grand opening of Taller Moreno, his very own auto shop on a bustling street corner in Cancun, was a moment of triumph. The freshly painted sign gleamed above the door, and inside, the smell of new tools mingled with the promise of success. The journey from employee to business owner hadn't been easy, and Ricardo hadn't done it alone. One day, Antonio, the man who frequently brought the cherished 1968 Impala to the shop, approached Ricardo with an unexpected proposal. "Ricardo," Antonio said gruffly, "I know you've been dreaming about this shop. The owner of the Impala is willing to help finance it. You should take the offer." Though initially cautious about accepting a loan, the opportunity was too generous to decline. Within a year, Ricardo's tireless work paid off yet again. The garage's profits, combined with countless hours of effort, allowed him to purchase a modest but charming house on the town's edge, a home for him and Luciana, a symbol of his determination and hard work. However, Ricardo didn't realize that the house marked the beginning of an unraveling he couldn't foresee. The first signs of trouble in his idyllic life were subtle, almost imperceptible. At first, Luciana's afternoons spent socializing with the neighborhood wives seemed harmless. Being naturally outgoing, Ricardo didn't begrudge her companionship. "If it makes you happy, mi amor, go enjoy time with your friends," he had said one evening, wiping grease from his hands after a long day. She had smiled, brushing a soft kiss against his cheek. "You're too good to me, Ricardo." But over time, her outings became more frequent, lasting longer into the evenings. By the time Ricardo returned home from grueling 12-hour shifts, the house was often empty except for the faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. The hot meals and warm smiles that once welcomed him had vanished, replaced by a quiet coldness. When Luciana was home, she seemed distant, distracted by neighborhood gossip or the latest fads shared among her friends. "Luciana," Ricardo said one evening, his voice tinged with concern. "Is everything okay? You seem different." She avoided his gaze, shaking her head. "I'm just tired, Ricardo. That's all." The shared laughter and simple dinners that once bonded them were replaced with silence or excuses of exhaustion. Their intimacy faded into a distant memory. Ricardo couldn't recall the last time she had touched him the way she used to. One night, summoning his courage, Ricardo brought up his concerns. Luciana brushed him off with a wave of her hand. "You're always working, Ricardo," she said flatly. "I'm tired. We can talk later." Ricardo had always dreamed of having children, filling the house with the joyful chaos of little feet and laughter. When he mentioned this, Luciana's reaction blindsided him. "No, Ricardo, not now," she said sharply. "Why not? We're stable now. Our house. The garage. What's stopping us?" he asked, his voice heavy with desperation. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not ready," she said firmly. "Do you even know what pregnancy does to a woman's body? I'm not about to ruin my figure. Maybe not ever." Her words hit him like a blow. Her refusal didn't just crush his hopes. It began to unravel the carefully built life he'd worked so hard for. Ricardo had no idea that while he spent his days under the hoods of cars, pouring his soul into his work, Luciana had found a rhythm to her life, a rhythm that no longer included him. What started as innocent afternoons with the neighborhood wives had morphed into something far more secretive. The group of women, many discontented with their own married lives, began exploring Cancun's vibrant nightlife. The city's bars welcomed them eagerly, their laughter merging with pulsing music and the clinking of glasses. They savored the attention of strangers, reveling in the fleeting escape from the confines of their domestic roles. For Luciana, it was exhilarating. After years of being the dutiful wife to a man she barely knew before their wedding, these nights out felt like freedom. At first, it was harmless, just a little playful banter and flirtation to break the monotony. But as time went on, Luciana became more immersed in the thrill of it all. The admiring gazes of strangers who didn't ask for anything in return gave her a rush that her life at home no longer provided. The more she indulged in this world, the more detached she grew from the life Ricardo had worked so hard to build. Ricardo remained oblivious to the changes creeping into their marriage. His long days at the garage shielded him from the reality unfolding behind the scenes. To him, Luciana was still the light of his life, the person who made every grueling hour worthwhile. Their arranged marriage no longer mattered to him. What mattered was that he loved her now, completely and unconditionally. But Ricardo's life was unraveling, and the toll was evident. The steady hands that once deftly worked with tools now trembled, and the spark in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a heavy weariness. Antonio, the familiar owner of the sleek black Impala, noticed the change immediately. The cheerful mechanic who once hummed while working had grown silent, his demeanor distant and strained. One evening, Antonio arrived at the garage after hours to pick up his car and found Ricardo sitting alone on a stool, staring vacantly at the floor with idle tools in his hands. "Hey, kid, what's going on?" Antonio asked, his rough voice breaking the silence. Ricardo forced a weak smile and shook his head. "Nothing, just tired." Antonio didn't buy it. Studying him for a long moment, he placed a firm hand on Ricardo's shoulder. "Come on, let's go for a drive." Though hesitant, Ricardo eventually agreed. Antonio led him to the Impala, its polished exterior gleaming under the dim garage lights. The moment Ricardo slid into the passenger seat, a sense of comfort washed over him. This car had always been special to him, and tonight it felt like a safe haven. They drove through Cancun's bustling streets in silence, the city alive with music and laughter. Eventually, Antonio parked by the coast, where the waves crashed rhythmically against the rocks. Reaching into the glove compartment, he pulled out a cigar and handed it to Ricardo, along with a lighter. Ricardo hesitated, then lit the cigar with unsteady hands. His first puff made him cough, but Antonio chuckled. "It's not about how you start," he said. "It's about how you finish." The quiet hum of the engine, the scent of the cigar mingling with salty sea air, and Antonio's steady presence loosened something in Ricardo. Words spilled out, his fears about Luciana, her growing distance, her refusal to have children, and her endless absences. He confessed the gnawing doubts that had consumed him. Antonio listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Ricardo finished, Antonio leaned back in his seat with a heavy sigh. "Listen, kid," he began. "I've seen a lot in my time. Good people destroyed by the ones they trusted most." Ricardo frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Antonio turned to him, his gaze sharp. "I'm not just a guy who loves cars. I'm a hitman. I work for people who don't forgive mistakes. Part of my job is finding the truth, surveillance, digging into lives. I know how to uncover secrets." Ricardo stared at him, stunned into silence. Antonio took another puff of his cigar before continuing. "I can find out what your wife's really doing when you're not around. But it won't be cheap." Without hesitation, Ricardo replied, "I'll pay, whatever it takes." Antonio's expression turned serious. "The price might not be what you expect. It could cost more than money." "I don't care," Ricardo said firmly. "I just want to know the truth." The next day, Antonio began his investigation. He was careful and discreet, following Luciana and her friends without raising suspicion. Within a week, he uncovered enough to confirm Ricardo's worst fears. The women weren't just enjoying harmless outings. They were spending nights in Cancun's bars, drinking and dancing with strange men. The deeper Antonio dug, the darker the revelations became. Luciana wasn't merely flirting. She was going home with different men, sometimes twice a week, vanishing into the night and returning only in the early hours of the morning. The pattern was unmistakable. Antonio documented everything, each detail cutting deeper into Ricardo's heart. One evening, after hours at the garage, Antonio approached Ricardo with a grim expression. "I'm sorry, kid," he said quietly. "Your wife, she's not just out partying. She's sleeping with other men. Regularly." Ricardo felt as if the ground had crumbled beneath him, leaving him in freefall. Antonio's revelation wasn't vague or uncertain. It was backed by the kind of meticulous detail that came with experience in his line of work. Seated in the shadowy garage after hours, Antonio's face was firm but tinged with reluctant sympathy. "I didn't come here with just words," Antonio said, his voice steady. From his jacket, he pulled out a small USB drive and a plain brown envelope, placing them on the workbench between them. "Everything you need to know is here. Videos, receipts, timelines. It's all there." Ricardo stared at the objects as if they might explode, his hands trembling as he reached for the envelope. Inside were screenshots of hotel reservations and invoices, each one unmistakably under Luciana's name. The receipts weren't for meals or outings. They were for rooms booked by the hour at hotels scattered across Cancun. "It wasn't a one-time thing," Antonio added, his tone sharp but calm. "Different men, different places. You deserve to know the truth." The USB in Ricardo's hand felt heavier than it should. His gaze drifted to a laptop resting on the workbench, and Antonio gestured toward it. "Take your time," he said, standing. When you're ready, we'll talk about what comes next. Numbly, Ricardo nodded as Antonio exited the room. He plugged the drive into the laptop, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. The first video loaded, and there she was. Luciana, laughing and dancing in a crowded bar, her body pressed against another man's. Clip after clip followed, each more damning than the last. There were grainy images of her entering hotels, holding hands with strangers, her expression carefree in a way Ricardo hadn't seen in years. The timestamps were irrefutable. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness, it was a calculated pattern of betrayal. When the final file ended, Ricardo slumped in the chair, staring blankly at the dark screen. The evidence replayed in his mind like a cruel loop. Luciana wasn't just unhappy or distant. She had been living a life that excluded him entirely. Ricardo left the garage in a daze, the weight of the truth suffocating him. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove home, the sound of the engine blending with the storm of thoughts in his head. When he walked into the house, he found Luciana in the living room, casually flipping through a magazine, as if nothing had changed. The air in the room felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken tension. "Luciana," Ricardo said, his voice raw and unsteady. "We need to talk." She glanced up, momentarily startled by his tone, but quickly masked her surprise with indifference. "What now?" she asked flatly, her tone dismissive. Ricardo's heart pounded as he moved closer, pulling the printed receipts from his jacket pocket and slamming them onto the coffee table. "What's this?" he demanded, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "You're not even trying to hide it anymore." Luciana's eyes darted to the papers, her expression faltering for a brief second before she let out a nervous laugh. "What is this, Ricardo? Are you spying on me now? This is ridiculous." She stood abruptly, her voice rising in mock outrage. "You've lost your mind." "Don't lie to me," Ricardo shouted, his voice breaking. "I know everything. The hotels, the men, the lies. I've given everything to this marriage, and this is how you repay me." Luciana's face hardened, her lips curled into a bitter smile as she crossed her arms. "You think you can control me? Dictate my life because you're the one working yourself to death in that garage? I've spent years living by your rules, listening to you and everyone else tell me how to live. I'm done." Ricardo stared at her, disbelief etched into every feature. "Done? You're saying you're done with the life I've been building for us? I've sacrificed everything for you, for us, and this is what I get?" Luciana's expression turned icy, her voice cutting like a blade. "You think I owe you something because you've been playing the hard-working husband? Newsflash, Ricardo. I don't owe you anything. I'm finally living my life on my terms. I won't apologize for that." Ricardo felt a lump in his throat, his voice trembling as he replied, "Your freedom is built on my sacrifices, Luciana. Every late night, every extra hour, I gave all of it to make a life for us. You're tearing it apart and you're acting like it doesn't even matter." Luciana's laugh was hollow, her bitterness palpable. "You think you're some kind of hero. You've been so consumed with your precious garage and your dreams that you didn't even notice I've been miserable for years. I never asked for this life, Ricardo, not once." Ricardo's voice cracked, his pain too overwhelming to contain. "If you've hated this life so much, why didn't you just leave me? Why go behind my back? Why destroy everything we had?" Luciana stepped closer, her face inches from his, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You really want to know why? Because you're weak, Ricardo. You thought I'd stay loyal out of gratitude. You thought I'd be satisfied with the small, pathetic life you've built. But I've outgrown you and this marriage. If you want to leave, go ahead, but don't think for a second that I'll make it easy for you." Her words landed like blows, each one cutting deeper than the last. Ricardo stared at her, the woman he had once loved, now a stranger in every sense. The life he had worked so hard to create was gone, shattered beyond repair, and Luciana's cold defiance left him with nothing but the weight of betrayal. Ricardo stood frozen, disbelief coursing through him. The woman he had poured his heart into, the one he had sacrificed so much for, had just dismantled everything they had built with a few venomous words. Luciana's voice was laced with cruelty as she delivered her final blow. "If you think you'll take a cent from me in a divorce, think again. I'll destroy you. I'll fabricate a domestic offense case so convincing you won't even know what hit you. You'll lose everything. Your garage, your reputation, everything." Her words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. They were not just a threat to his pride, but a calculated attack on everything he held dear. Ricardo didn't respond. His chest heaved, and his legs felt like lead as he turned toward the door. Each step was heavier than the last, but he kept moving. Luciana's voice echoed behind him, taunting him, but he didn't look back. The cold night air hit his face as he stepped outside, feeling like a bitter reprieve from the suffocating house. As the door shut behind him, Ricardo knew there was no going back to the life he once knew. Later that night, Ricardo returned to his home. His heart weighed heavily in his chest, and his thoughts were a chaotic mess. Every harsh word Luciana had thrown at him replayed in his mind like a cruel recording. He didn't know where else to go. Despite the pain, his home still felt like the only place he belonged. But as he stepped inside, something felt off. The lights were dim, casting eerie shadows across the room. The air was thick with tension, and unease crept up his spine. He moved toward the living room, but before he could react, a heavy force struck him from behind. Ricardo stumbled forward, his breath knocked out of him as strong hands grabbed him. He tried to fight back, but he was outnumbered. 5 men surrounded him, their faces hard and full of malice. They began beating him mercilessly. Punches and kicks rained down on his ribs, chest, and face. Ricardo's attempts to resist were futile. His head spun, the pain overwhelming his senses. "You thought you could control her," one of the men sneered, driving a fist into Ricardo's side. "She's ours now." Ricardo's vision blurred, blood dripping from his lips as he struggled to comprehend the situation. These weren't strangers. They were Luciana's lovers. One by one, they took turns attacking him, breaking him down both physically and emotionally. When they were done, Ricardo was dragged across the floor, his limbs bound tightly to a chair with rough ropes. His body slumped forward, battered and bruised. Every inch of him ached. Blood soaked his clothes, and his breathing was shallow and labored. Around him, the men's mocking laughter mixed with Luciana's voice, cold and unrecognizable. The love he had once believed in now felt like a cruel illusion. The room closed in on him, suffocating and oppressive. Ricardo's mind raced, desperate for a way out, but there was none. He was immobilized, forced to endure the torment. Then Luciana entered the room wearing a silk robe that barely concealed her figure. Her expression was smug as she surveyed the scene. "Do you see now, Ricardo?" she purred, her voice dripping with mockery. "I'm a goddess. I was never meant for just one man, especially not someone as small and pathetic as you." What followed was a humiliating display designed to crush him further. Luciana turned to the men, her worshippers, and spent the next 2 hours indulging in a sick display of power and control. Ricardo, bloodied and restrained, could do nothing but endure. When it was over, she sauntered back to him, her expression triumphant. "Now, my dear husband, do you see? You're nothing. A mere pawn, my slave. You'll never be more than that." Ricardo, broken but not defeated, sat slumped in the chair. His body ached, his vision blurred, but deep within him, a fire still burned. He clenched his teeth, the taste of blood sharp in his mouth. Despite everything, he forced himself to speak. "If I survive this," he rasped, his voice hoarse but steady. "If I live to see another day—" His eyes, filled with pain but unwavering, locked onto Luciana. The woman he had once loved was now his greatest enemy. "I swear to you," he said, his words dripping with quiet rage, "you will regret this. I will be your worst nightmare. Every ounce of pain you've inflicted on me, I'll return it tenfold." Luciana paused, her smirk faltering for a split second, but she quickly masked it with anger, her eyes narrowing as she glared at him. "You think you can intimidate me?" she snapped. Her voice rose, filled with venom. Turning to the men, she barked, "Teach him another lesson." The men hesitated, startled by the ferocity of her command, but quickly obeyed. They descended on Ricardo again, their fists and feet landing with sickening force. The pain was excruciating, but Ricardo didn't flinch. He didn't beg. Even as his body gave way, his spirit remained defiant. Luciana watched from a distance, her expression twisted with fury. But something about Ricardo's words seemed to linger in the air, unsettling her. She clenched her fists tightly, her frustration evident. Yet she refused to let fear creep in. She had control now, and she wasn't about to let it slip. For Ricardo, the physical pain was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the betrayal that cut deeper than any wound. Even as darkness closed in, he held on to his resolve. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. A reckoning would come, and Ricardo Moreno would make sure of it. The men stepped back, awaiting her signal, but Luciana's expression faltered. Beneath her fury was something she hadn't anticipated. Ricardo's defiant words had struck a nerve she hadn't realized was exposed. Her once smug confidence began to crumble, replaced by a discomfort she couldn't quite place. After the brutal attack, Ricardo's attackers dumped his battered body by the canal, leaving him to the cold night and the rushing water. They walked away without a second glance, certain that he wouldn't make it until morning. To them, he was finished, broken and discarded, a problem solved. But what they didn't know was that Antonio's men had been tailing them the entire time, staying just out of sight. Antonio had suspected things might escalate and had sent his people to intervene if needed. When they found Ricardo barely clinging to life, they moved quickly. With quiet precision, they pulled him from the canal and loaded him into a van, ensuring no one saw them. The van sped through the night, taking Ricardo to a secure warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Antonio was already there, his face set with grim determination as he waited. When the van doors opened, revealing Ricardo's limp form, Antonio didn't hesitate. "Get a doctor, now," he ordered, his voice firm but laced with relief. The men carefully placed Ricardo on a table, mindful of his fragile state. Minutes later, the doctor arrived and began his work, methodically cleaning Ricardo's wounds and assessing the damage. "He's in rough shape," the doctor murmured, shaking his head as he worked. "But he's alive. That alone is remarkable." Antonio didn't leave the warehouse. He paced relentlessly, pressing the doctor for updates. Hours passed before Ricardo's eyelids fluttered open. His vision was hazy, and pain shot through his body with every attempt to move. "Stay still," Antonio said softly, stepping closer. "You're alive, Ricardo. You're going to be okay." Ricardo blinked, trying to make sense of his surroundings. I survived," he rasped, his voice barely audible. The doctor nodded, his tone professional yet reassuring. "You've been through hell, but you're tougher than you look. Rest now, you've earned it." Memories of the attack began flooding back, and Ricardo's expression darkened. His voice cracked as he muttered, "Luciana, she let them do this to me." Antonio's jaw tightened, his face a mask of restrained anger. "She'll answer for it," he said firmly. "But first, you need to heal. There's a bigger fight ahead, Ricardo, one you can't face like this." Exhaustion overtook him, and Ricardo closed his eyes, letting the weight of his injuries pull him into unconsciousness. Though his body was broken, his spirit remained intact. He vowed silently that this wasn't the end. Luciana and her accomplices wouldn't get away with it. 2 days later, while Ricardo recovered in the warehouse, Luciana continued her life as though nothing had happened. She remained blissfully unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to crumble. That afternoon, she strolled into the bank to check her accounts, already planning a lavish shopping spree. But when she swiped her card, the machine displayed an error. Puzzled, she tried again, only to see the same message. Card declined. Confused and uneasy, she pulled out her phone to check her account balances. Her jaw dropped as every balance read 0. Her accounts were frozen. Panic set in, and she frantically tried to call the bank, but the lines were busy. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from her lawyer. The text was brief and chilling. "You must vacate the house immediately. Ownership has been transferred to a Mr. Gabriel." Luciana froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. Her first instinct was denial. This had to be a mistake. Fueled by adrenaline, she rushed home to confirm the message was wrong. When she arrived, she found a stranger standing at the front door, suitcase in hand. "You'll need to leave," the man said, his tone calm but firm. "This house now belongs to Mr. Gabriel." Luciana's face drained of color. "What are you talking about? This is my home. I've lived here for years. There's no way—" The man interrupted, holding out official paperwork. "It's all here. The property has been legally transferred. You have until the end of the day to vacate." Her heart raced, panic clawing at her chest. "Who the hell is Gabriel?" she shouted, her voice rising in desperation. The man didn't respond, simply stepping aside to let her process the reality. Furious and disoriented, Luciana stormed away, determined to uncover who was behind this. She couldn't fathom how her life had spiraled so completely out of control. Deep down, a nagging suspicion began to form. Could Ricardo have done this? She dismissed the thought immediately. He wouldn't dare, would he? Her panic gave way to a simmering rage as she vowed to find answers. But what she didn't know was that Ricardo, the man she had left for dead, was still alive, and he was already planning his next move. Luciana drove to the garage, hoping for a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. When she arrived, her breath caught in her throat. The doors were locked, and a small sign hung prominently on the door, "Property sold." Beneath it, the name of the new owner was listed, Gabriel. For a moment, Luciana couldn't move. The reality of her situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her hands trembled and her mind raced. Everything she'd leaned on, every ounce of security she thought she had, was crumbling. She didn't know who Gabriel was, but she was certain of one thing. This was no coincidence. Ricardo was alive, and somehow he was behind all of it. Anger surged within her, mingling with panic. She felt cornered, helpless. Her thoughts spiraled as she pulled out her phone and dialed one of her lovers, desperate for some kind of comfort or distraction. When he answered, his voice was calm but tinged with concern. "Luciana, what's going on?" "Just come get me," she said, her voice shaky and raw. "I need to get out of here." Within minutes, he arrived, and she left without even glancing back at the house she'd once called home. The drive was tense and silent, her mind a storm of emotions. Everything, her accounts, her home, the garage, had been taken from her in a matter of days. He brought her to his place, a secluded house she had visited before under different circumstances. This time it felt heavier, more like a temporary escape than a haven. She slumped onto his couch, her body sagging under the weight of exhaustion. "What happened?" he asked, sitting beside her, his tone steady but curious. She hesitated before the words poured out in a torrent. She told him everything: the frozen bank accounts, the house being taken, the garage sold, all orchestrated by Ricardo, who she had thought was gone for good. She admitted how she had underestimated him, pushing him away until she could no longer control the fallout. Her lover listened intently, but a flicker of something colder crossed his face. Luciana had once relished the thrill of these affairs, the excitement of being with someone forbidden, but now even his presence felt hollow, a reminder of how quickly things had unraveled. "This isn't over," he finally said, his voice firm. "You can't let it end here." Luciana met his gaze, her expression hardening. Her thoughts were consumed by Ricardo. He had survived, turned the tables, and stripped her of everything she valued. Fury bubbled up again, fierce and consuming. "I won't let him win," she said through clenched teeth, more to herself than to him. But beneath her anger lurked a deeper unease. She could feel the situation spiraling into something darker, something far beyond her control. 3 weeks had passed since Ricardo's near-fatal beating. In that time, the warehouse Antonio had taken him to became his sanctuary. It was here, far from prying eyes, that Ricardo rebuilt himself, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Under Antonio's relentless guidance, he transformed into a version of himself he never thought possible. Antonio's training was grueling. Ricardo learned to handle tools of all kinds, tools, knives, and even machetes. He practiced how to clean, maintain, and wield them with precision. The lessons pushed him to his limits, breaking down his old self and building something stronger in its place. This was no longer about fixing cars or dreaming of a peaceful life. It was about survival and reclaiming what was his. Over the weeks, Ricardo's body grew leaner, his movements more purposeful. His mind sharpened, each training session forging him into someone unrecognizable. He was no longer a victim or a mechanic weighed down by betrayal. He had become a man of intent, prepared to fight for what was taken from him. Finally, Antonio decided it was time for Ricardo to meet the man behind the curtain, Gabriel. Years ago, Gabriel had quietly financed Ricardo's garage, a seemingly generous gesture. But now it was clear Gabriel was no ordinary businessman. He was a powerful figure in the criminal underworld, a man whose reach extended across the city. Gabriel had been watching Ricardo's progress from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to bring him into the fold. The meeting took place in one of Gabriel's private properties, a dimly lit room that exuded authority and control. Gabriel sat behind a massive oak desk, his demeanor calm yet commanding. His sharp gaze lingered on Ricardo, assessing him like a craftsman appraising his work. "You've come a long way," Gabriel said, his voice deep and deliberate. "I've seen how hard you've worked, how much you've endured. Now we stand at a crossroads. You have decisions to make, Ricardo." Ricardo stood tall, his posture steady and unwavering. His hands rested at his sides, brushing against the tools that had become an extension of him. He understood the weight of what was being offered and the cost of stepping forward. "I've already made my choice," Ricardo said, his voice firm. Gabriel leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Good, because from here on out, there's no turning back." In that moment, Ricardo knew he had crossed a line. He was no longer the man he once was. The path ahead was treacherous, but he was ready to face it, and to ensure that everyone who had betrayed him paid the price. Gabriel leaned back slightly, his gaze narrowing as he scrutinized Ricardo. "You've hit rock bottom. Your wife betrayed you, your pride is in tatters, and your home is gone. But now you have a choice," he said, his voice steady and deliberate. "You can start over, file for divorce, walk away, and leave Luciana behind. You'll be free of her, free of everything she's done to you." Gabriel paused, letting the words sink in before his tone turned colder. "Or you can choose vengeance. But understand, Ricardo, revenge is a one-way street. If you go down this road, you won't be the same man. You'll have to abandon your humanity. You'll become someone who lives by the code of the streets, a butcher's." The weight of the decision hung in the air like a storm cloud. This wasn't a simple choice. It was a turning point, one that would shape the rest of Ricardo's life. Gabriel's words were clear. There was no going back. Ricardo didn't flinch. He had already made up his mind. The fire inside him burned hotter than ever, fueled not by a desire for justice, but by a thirst for retribution. His old life, filled with dreams of peace and family, was gone. All that remained was the need to make Luciana pay. "I know what I want," Ricardo said, his voice calm but firm. "I choose revenge. For what she's done to me, for destroying everything I built. I'll do whatever it takes to make her suffer." Gabriel studied him, his face unreadable. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "So be it," he said. His tone was as cold as ice. "But remember this, revenge will consume you. It requires strength, focus, and the will to do what others won't. If you hesitate, if you falter, you'll fail." Ricardo's heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through him. Fear had no place in his mind, only certainty. Luciana had taken everything from him, and now it was her turn to lose. As Gabriel's calculating eyes lingered on him, Ricardo felt the finality of his choice settle in. His path was set, and there was no turning back. Luciana sat on the couch in her lover's dimly lit apartment, her thoughts in turmoil. She had spent the day seeking solace in his company, trying to escape the storm her life had become. But no amount of distraction could erase the gnawing feeling in her chest. Ricardo was still out there, silent and looming like a shadow. She had underestimated him once, and now the weight of that mistake pressed down on her like a vice. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. She froze. Visitors were rare here, and something about the timing felt off. When she opened the door, no one was there. Only a small package wrapped in bright red paper sitting on the ground. Her breath caught in her throat. The wrapping was too familiar. Ricardo used to give her gifts in paper just like this. Luciana hesitated, her hands trembling as she picked it up. She untied the strings slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. When she opened the box, her worst fears were confirmed. Inside was a severed male organ, meticulously wrapped in tissue paper. The sight made her stomach churn, bile rising in her throat. Her hands shook as she pulled out a note tucked beside the gruesome gift. The scrawled words in bold black ink sent ice through her veins. "You've unleashed hell. 1 down, 4 to go. Call the cops, and you're next." Luciana's vision blurred. Her mind raced to make sense of what she was seeing, but the meaning was clear. Ricardo wasn't coming back to beg for forgiveness or to plead for reconciliation. He was coming for vengeance, and he had already started. She stumbled backward, dropping the note as her chest tightened with panic. The apartment, which had once felt like a haven, now seemed suffocating and oppressive. Her breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps as the edges of her vision darkened. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. Before the darkness took her, one terrifying thought consumed her mind. What have I done? When Luciana regained consciousness, her lover knelt beside her, his face pale with worry. She struggled to sit up, her head pounding and her body weak from the shock. His voice was distant at first, but his next words snapped her back to reality. "Diego's dead," he said, his tone tight with fear. "They found his body just outside the city. Whoever did it, they made sure it was brutal." Luciana's blood ran cold. Diego was part of their small, tangled circle of lovers, a man she had once trusted. Now he was dead, and his murder confirmed what she had been too afraid to admit. Someone was coming for them, and it wasn't just anyone. It was Ricardo. Her mind spiraled as her lover's words echoed in her ears, fear mixed with guilt and anger, swirling into a storm of emotions. Ricardo had survived, and he was dismantling her life piece by piece. This wasn't the man she had once manipulated and betrayed. This was someone else entirely, someone she had created through her own actions. The realization hit her like a blow. Ricardo wasn't playing games. He was delivering judgment, and there would be no escape. Luciana sat silently, her trembling hands reaching for the red box left on the table. Her fingers shook as she opened it once more, dreading what she already knew was inside. The grotesque contents and the menacing note sent a fresh wave of nausea rolling through her. The message was crystal clear. This was personal, and whoever was behind it wanted her to feel the fear. The walls of the apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. She wasn't safe here. Not anymore. Her lover's expression hardened as he read the note again. He made a quick, decisive move. "We can't stay here," he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "If they did this to Diego, we're next. We have to leave now." Luciana nodded without argument. She knew he was right. Ricardo wasn't just angry, he was relentless, and the consequences of pushing him too far were spiraling out of control. They hastily packed what little they could and fled the apartment, speeding away in his car, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the city. They headed toward Bacalar, a remote town known for its serene lagoons. It was far enough to offer a brief reprieve, or so they hoped. Upon arriving, they found a modest, run-down motel on the town's outskirts. Its isolation felt like a refuge, a small haven away from the chaos they had left behind. But peace was fleeting. That night, as darkness enveloped the town and silence filled the air, a sharp knock on their door shattered the quiet. Luciana froze, her heart racing as her lover cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. Outside, resting on the ground, was another box. The sight of it made Luciana's stomach drop like a lead weight. Her lover hesitated before bringing the box inside. Luciana's hands trembled as she watched him untie the string and lift the lid. This time the contents were even more horrifying. 6 balls, carefully wrapped in dark cloth. Her breath caught in her throat, her vision swimming with terror. But the note that accompanied the gruesome package was what sent chills coursing through her veins. She read it aloud, her voice trembling. "For your necklace. You can run to the ends of the earth, but I will always be there." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. The small motel room felt colder, the walls closing in around them. Luciana's lover grabbed her shoulders, his pale face betraying his fear. "We have to leave, now," he said, panic rising in his voice. But Luciana knew deep down it was too late. Running wouldn't save them. Ricardo had become something unstoppable, a force far beyond anything she had anticipated. For the next 3 days, Luciana remained locked inside the motel room, consumed by a paralyzing fear that refused to let her rest. The once neutral walls now felt like a prison. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and every creak or shadow outside sent her heart racing. News of Alejandro, Juan, and Daniel's brutal deaths weighed heavily on her, each one a stark reminder that the noose around her was tightening. Her lover, Emiliano, paced the room restlessly, glued to his phone, anxiously awaiting updates. Though he spoke little, the tension between them was suffocating. The weight of what they had unleashed pressed on both of them. On the 4th day, Emiliano decided to leave. "I'll get us something to eat," he said, his voice strained as he stepped out. Hours passed, but he didn't return. The silence in the room grew unbearable as the clock mocked Luciana with every tick. A sense of dread clawed at her chest, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. After 3 agonizing hours, Luciana couldn't sit still any longer. She grabbed the car keys and burst out of the motel room, the hot desert air slapping her face. Her mind was racing. Emiliano was in danger. She was certain of it. She climbed into the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, and sped off. The further she drove, the emptier the world became. The arid expanse of the landscape stretched endlessly before her, the horizon blurred by heat. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror, convinced someone was following her. Anxiety pressed against her chest, suffocating her as her thoughts spun wildly. Her car sped toward the vast, barren Chihuahuan desert. Something about its emptiness felt magnetic, like a place where everything could disappear, including her. As the isolation of the desert swallowed her surroundings, she felt a strange mix of dread and comfort. The vast nothingness offered no answers, only the illusion of escape. The highway stretched endlessly into the haze of the horizon. The silence inside the car became deafening, amplifying the weight of everything that had happened. Ricardo's vengeance, the bodies piling up, the unrelenting fear, it all bore down on her, suffocating and inescapable. With each passing mile, the gravity of her situation pulled her further away from hope. The world blurred around her, but Luciana knew there was no outrunning what awaited her. The city was long gone, its distant glow swallowed by the horizon. Now, only the barren expanse of the Chihuahuan desert lay ahead. The car roared forward as Luciana gripped the wheel tightly, her eyes fixed on the endless road. Her mind churned with one relentless thought. She wasn't just fleeing the city, she was running from the consequences of her own making. But no matter how fast she drove, she couldn't escape the shadow closing in behind her. The road stretched out endlessly, a path that felt less like salvation and more like a descent into the chaos she had unleashed. Hours later, the car sputtered to a stop. Out of fuel and options, Luciana was forced to continue on foot. Each step through the harsh desert terrain was a battle against exhaustion. Her legs felt like lead, her throat burned with thirst, and the searing sun bore down mercilessly. The horizon shimmered in the heat, an endless, unforgiving expanse of sand and scrub. Her breaths were labored, her chest heaving as she pushed herself forward, every fiber of her being screaming for her to stop. 2 hours of grueling trudging passed, and her strength began to fail. Her knees buckled, and she crumpled to the ground, the hot sand scorching her skin. But just as despair began to swallow her whole, she saw it, a glimmer on the horizon. A mirage, surely, but desperation gave her hope. She stumbled to her feet, her body aching as she staggered toward the shimmering image. Her arms outstretched, she reached for it, only to find nothing but empty air. The vision dissolved, leaving her gasping and broken. Collapsing once more, she choked on sobs that refused to come. Her body convulsed with exhaustion, and her mind teetered on the edge of surrender. But then, through the haze, something real appeared. A black SUV loomed in the distance, its silhouette cutting through the rippling air. Luciana's breath caught, her pulse quickening. Was it real, or another cruel trick? She could barely keep her eyes open as the sound of an engine approached, drawing closer until the vehicle stopped beside her. The doors opened, and for a moment, all was silent, save for the swirling dust. Then with a heavy thud, something cold and wet landed in her lap. Luciana blinked, trying to focus. When her eyes finally adjusted, a scream caught in her throat. Emiliano's severed head rested there, his lifeless eyes staring up at her. Blood streaked his pale face, his hair matted and sticky with crimson. His expression was frozen in terror, his mouth slightly agape as if his final moments had been spent begging for mercy. Luciana's hands trembled as she clutched the grotesque reminder of his fate. The SUV didn't linger, its doors slammed shut and the vehicle sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Luciana sat frozen, her mind refusing to process what had just happened. Her body was too weak to cry, her throat too dry to scream. The blood soaked through her clothes, burning her skin like fire. The desert around her felt more isolating than ever. Emiliano's head, once part of the man who had been her refuge, was now her only companion. The realization hit her like a wave. She had triggered this nightmare, and there was no escape. Ricardo's revenge wasn't just cruel, it was relentless. Time slipped away as Luciana remained motionless, staring at the lifeless face in her lap. She tried to move, but her body refused. The oppressive heat bore down on her as she struggled to her feet, her vision swimming with exhaustion and grief. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The sun showed no mercy. Her legs buckled beneath her as she stumbled forward, her body giving out little by little. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw. Her mind, a fog of fear and desperation, clung to one impossible thought: escape. Just as her strength failed her again, she saw something. Someone. Ricardo. His silhouette stood against the endless desert, his figure clear despite the rippling heat. Hope flared in her chest, and she forced herself to move. "It's him," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. "He found me." Her steps quickened, her heart pounding as she reached out to him. But as she neared, his figure wavered, then vanished. Another mirage. The despair that followed crushed her like a wave. She stumbled, her legs giving way, and collapsed into the sand once more. The ground beneath her shifted, and before she could react, she fell. The earth seemed to open up, swallowing her whole. She landed hard in a narrow pit, her body twisted awkwardly, the impact leaving her dazed. For several long moments, she lay motionless, the world spinning around her. The harsh desert sun felt distant now, its oppressive heat replaced by the cold shadows of the pit. Luciana's mind struggled to catch up, her thoughts fractured and incoherent. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. Her hands fumbled against the dirt walls, but her strength was gone. All she could do was lie there, alone and defeated, the consequences of her actions pressing down on her like the weight of the earth itself. The shadow stretched over her like a final judgment. Ricardo stood at the edge of the pit, his figure towering above her, his eyes cold and devoid of any humanity. Luciana's mouth opened, but her cracked, parched lips betrayed her. No words came out. She wanted to plead, to beg for mercy, but her throat, dry and raw, refused to cooperate. All she could do was stare at him. The man she once knew, the man who had once held her heart. But that man was gone. What stood before her now was a specter of vengeance, a relentless force stripped of love or forgiveness. Ricardo remained motionless for a moment, his gaze unyielding as he looked down at her. Then without a word, he raised his hand and gestured. The desert responded. The ground began to tremble, and the sand shifted, at first in small ripples, then with increasing ferocity. Like a tide obeying its master, the sand poured into the pit, cascading toward her in an unstoppable torrent. "No! Please, Ricardo, stop!" Luciana's scream tore through the air, hoarse and desperate, but the sound was swallowed by the desert's relentless roar. The grains of sand encased her legs, pressing against her, climbing higher and higher. Her chest heaved as panic set in, but there was no escape. The suffocating weight of the sand crushed against her body, filling her lungs, choking her as it rose. Ricardo remained still, a shadow unmoved by her cries, his silhouette unwavering as the sand continued to bury her. Her vision blurred, her strength fading. She clawed at the encroaching grains, but her feeble attempts were no match for the desert's power. The world narrowed, the light dimming as darkness overtook her. Ricardo's form lingered above her, the last image she saw before the abyss claimed her entirely. Ricardo was no longer the man he once was. The one who had loved, dreamed, and wished for a simple, peaceful life had vanished. In his place stood Cazador del Desierto, the desert hunter, a name whispered with fear by anyone who had the misfortune of knowing it. His eyes, once warm and full of hope, were now as barren as the desert he called home. Gabriel had reshaped him, turning him into something cold, ruthless, and unrecognizable. Ricardo had shed his old self entirely when he embraced his new identity. The desert became his domain, a harsh and unforgiving landscape where he hunted without mercy and struck with lethal precision. To the outside world, Ricardo was no longer a man, but a legend, a shadow that haunted the desert and the criminal underworld alike. As a lieutenant in Gabriel's cartel, his name was spoken in hushed tones, feared by both enemies and allies. He showed no hesitation when ending a life, whether with a Colt, a blade, or his bare hands. Blood stained his path, but he carried no regret. The desert hunter knew no pity, no hesitation, no remorse. His loyalty to Gabriel was absolute. In exchange for his transformation, Gabriel had given him power, wealth, and purpose. Ricardo repaid that debt with unwavering service, executing each mission with ruthless efficiency. His reputation grew with every liquidate, cementing his place as one of Gabriel's most trusted enforcers. Each act of violence pushed him further from the man he had once been. His humanity had been buried beneath the weight of bloodshed and vengeance. The pain of his past no longer drove him. It had been replaced by the cold clarity of destruction. In the harsh, unforgiving desert, Cazador del Desierto was more than a man. He was a force of nature, as inevitable as the scalding winds and relentless sun. His name became a ghost story whispered by men who once believed they were untouchable. But when confronted with the desert hunter, their arrogance dissolved into terror. Ricardo's transformation was complete. The life he once lived, the love he had once felt, was gone, buried beneath layers of sand and brutality. He had become the monster he vowed to be, the ultimate embodiment of the vengeance that had consumed him. And the desert, vast and eternal, bore silent witness to the legend of the man who had become its most ruthless predator.